Hey homies. Today's special What If Dean became Ultimate Angel Hunter. Fourth episode. So firstly I want to inform you that I do love your feedback. Comment on what changes you want in my videos and what you don't like. Also suggest crossover characters for Dean Winchester. So move into the video. Oh, baby brother, the trickster said sadly. He gasped as he was suddenly dropped. He landed on his rump and stared up at Dean. The wings suddenly retracted and there was no sign of the fallen angel. He reached out with his senses and only felt a human presence. He eyed Dean warily. "Dean," he said carefully, "who have you been talking to?" Dean took a step back, shaking his head. "Who are you?" he whispered. The trickster slowly stood, looking between the two brothers. "You know about this?" he asked Sam, seeing that Sam's shocked reaction was aimed toward himself and not Dean. Dean held his hand up before Sam could answer. "No. You first. Who are you? 'Cause you sure as fuck ain't a trickster." The trickster laughed in disbelief as he shook his head. "Dean Winchester, there's a shit ton of stuff going over the airwaves about you turning down Michael, and you go and let in Seraphiel. Do you have any idea who he is? What he is?" he shouted. Dean bristled as he glared, not answering. He could feel the grace of an angel lightly touching him, seeking out Seraphiel, but careful to hide its own identity. If he wanted to find out who they were up against, he'd have to let the angel in. Dean took a deep breath and prepared for the worst. Bright, loving, and full of mischief, Dean instantly recognized Gabriel's grace. He immediately pushed Gabriel out and edged away as Gabriel drew closer, looking at him curiously. "It's just you in there," Gabriel said in awe. "How'd you pull that off?" "Stillborn," Dean replied, trying to keep distance between himself and Gabriel. "But you need permission," Gabriel argued. He looked at Sam, who was watching with a slightly amused smile. Dean looked away uncomfortably. "Not me," he quietly admitted. He sucked in a breath as Gabriel's grace poked at him again. There was no hate, just an intense curiosity. He tried to brush Gabriel off, but his brother was persistent. "Knock it off." Gabriel vanished from in front of Dean and reappeared behind him, looking over the other angel. "But this is. Dean spun around to face Gabriel. "Wrong. I know. Quit poking me." "Not wrong, you don't feel wrong, just different," Gabriel replied distractedly as he circled Dean. "Always different," he muttered absently. Dean looked to Sam helplessly. He gasped as Gabriel pulled him into a tight hug. In his moment of shock, Gabriel weaseled his way into his grace and was poking around in every corner he could reach. He tried to push Gabriel out again, but to no avail. He resigned to his fate, not wanting to waste what little energy he had on a battle he had no hope of winning. He grimaced as Gabriel reprimanded him for his past actions and sniggered over the occasional prank. Eventually, Gabriel pulled back and held Dean at arm's length. "How did let this happen?" he asked. Dean shrugged. "Unless Hess gone," he softly replied. "Duty don't know. Things are so fucked up right now." Gabriel nodded in agreement. "Yeah, well, congratulations, Seraphiel," he said, clapping Dean on the back. "You managed to fuck up the apocalypse before it even started." "I fuck up a lot of things," Dean grumbled. Sam approached the pair. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Dean sifted through Gabriel's grace, checking to see if the other had any plans to blow his cover. "Only if you turn me in first," Gabriel answered. Dean nodded and faced Sam. "We're good, Gabriels." Gabriel, Sam said incredulously. "Shouldn't he be working with Michael?" "Well," Gabriel rubbed the back of his neck, looking away. "He ran away like a coward," Dean supplied, making Gabriel flinch. "Just before the rebellion started, he hightailed it out of there." "Do you have any idea what it was like?" Gabriel shouted as he brought out his wings. 3 pairs of shimmering gold wings spread out threateningly and Dean stepped back, flashing his own wings. "The fighting was bad enough before Lucifer rebelled. Even before Dad made you were made for Lucifer." "Made to do what?" Dean growled as he fought against the dull pain in his wings. He and Gabriel circled each other as Sam slowly backed away. "You left and I had to pick up the pieces. So what if I was made for him? He loved you more than he ever loved me." "Yet he didn't hesitate to put his mark on you," Gabriel hissed, jabbing his grace harshly against where Lucifer's grace had burned into Seraphiel's. "I wasn't good enough for him." "You all but told him to." Dean winced as the strain on his wings built up. They shook as he held them out, refusing to back down. "You have no idea how much that hurt him." Gabriel scoffed, his grace still lingering on Lucifer's mark. He had a funny way of showing it, his eyes narrowed as his grace brushed against another angel's mark. A much fresher one. "What, Castiel? How? When did?" He stared at Dean in shock. When did you run into Castiel?" Dean warily lowered his wings as Gabriel's folded. "What about Cause?" Gabriel swallowed uncertainly. "Spit it out, Gabriel," Dean growled. "Does it have anything to do with him being brought back?" "Brought back? He died." Dean nodded. "Died buying me some time. Then he turns back up." Good as new, he explained. Gabriel frowned as he stared at Dean. He was made for you. Dean's breath left him. Why? He stuttered. How should I know? Gabriel huffed. After you were banished, Dad tracked me down just to show me a new angel he made. The last angel he ever made, and then he said it was for you and let me go back to Earth. Said it'd be left alone if I just delivered a message. That was the last I ever saw of him. Well, that's dumb. Dean said, reeling. Gabriel crossed his arms, rolling his eyes. It was like he made you a Christmas card. Fuck. Castiel is a Christmas card. That doesn't explain why he was made. Or me. Dean shouted, throwing his hands up in frustration. Maybe if I had a clue, I could fix everything. You can't fix the apocalypse, Seraphiel, Gabriel said. It's been foretold. It's part of God's plan. Nothing you do can stop this. Yeah? Well, God's plan. It sucks. I've already proven a prophet wrong. What's stopping me from derailing Dad's fucked up plan? You? Dean asked as he drew closer to Gabriel, daring the other angel to argue. Just whose side are you on? Gabriel hesitated. I don't know, he quietly replied. Not Michael's. Not Lucifer's. I just want the fighting to stop. At what cost? A new voice asked. The pair of angels quickly turned to look at the newcomer. They both looked uncomfortable upon seeing Castiel standing next to Sam. How long have you been here? Dean asked carefully. Long enough, Castiel replied indifferently. He directed his attention back to Gabriel. Well, Gabriel. Gabriel shuffled his feet and readjusted his wings. Preferably if one just kills the other. He tried. Like it's supposed to happen. And they'll take out everyone if it goes down like that, Dean pointed out. Gabriel shrugged as he looked away. At least it'll finally be over. I'd let the world be destroyed just so you didn't have to deal with your brothers fighting, Sam exclaimed. Like there's any other choice. Gabriel cried out. There's always a choice. Dean argued. I chose to rebel. I chose to take over this body. I chose not to just end this bloodline. Had the perfect chance, too. Colda made it so there was no bringing Sam back to life, he said, avoiding Sam's eyes. But I chose him over my own selfishness. And, right now, I'm choosing to stop this. Gabriel's grace was still probing through Seraphiel's, and he felt the truth and conviction of Seraphiel's words. He reached out to Castiel and found the younger angel's grace marked by Dean. He gave Castiel a curious gaze and looked back at Dean. I thought he had you claimed each other, how does that work? Quite well, actually, Castiel replied. What does he mean by claimed? Sam asked. It's hard to explain, Dean said. We're undivided to each other. But the way we did it, neither of us has more say. So you're married? Sam asked, giving Dean a sly smile. Married and divorced, according to that logic, Gabriel said. And a boyfriend stealing hussy. You backed off. You practically threw me at him. Dean snapped. Castiel grimaced as the two older angels held their wings out aggressively. I should stop this before Dean gets himself hurt. Sam looked to Castiel in concern. Are they gonna fight? He quietly asked. Castiel shook his head. I won't let it come to that, but I also don't want him to strain himself too much. Come on, Siri, Gabriel goaded. Let's see what you got. I won't fight you, Gabriel, Dean said gruffly. He tried to back away without it seeming like he was backing down. You're the one who wants to stop the apocalypse. If you can't handle me, what makes you think you can fight Michael? Gabriel asked. And you can bet your ass hell fight you for that vessel. Too bad it won't work, Dean shot back. Oh, I'm sure they could find a way to make it work, Gabriel replied. You know as well as I do that Michael'll do everything in his power to play his part in Dad's plan. Then he'll just have a rotting corpse on his hands. The soul no longer has rights to this body, and I can't give permission, Dean said. His wings were visibly shaking. He gave them a quick flap to distract from the tremors. Unfortunately, Gabriel took that as his cue to attack. Gabriel surged forward and instantly found Castiel blocking his path. Castiel simply stood between him and Dean with a calm expression. His wings were folded and his hands were by his sides. Despite the indifferent posture, Gabriel eyed Castiel warily. Castiel, move. No. Castiel caressed Dean's grace reassuringly and Dean reluctantly calmed down. Gabriel frowned as Dean all but collapsed against Castiel. What's wrong with him? He asked. Besides the obvious. Dean replied with a bitter laugh. He pushed off of Castiel. Nothing. I'm fine. That's recuperating, Castiel said. He shrugged at the reprimanding pinch his grace received. Gabriel gingerly poked at Seraphiel's grace, looking for an answer. He ignored the tired shoves as he found what he was looking for. Demons, geez, you two really are a pair, he said looking between Sam and Dean. Both brothers had the decency to look embarrassed. Anyway, this doesn't change what I said. How are you gonna fight if you can't? Dean heaved a sigh. I'm hoping he'll be able to talk to Lucifer. Get him to listen to me. Nice plane, Gabriel said sarcastically. What else can we do? Sam asked. Lock him back up, Gabriel replied. He caught Dean's sour look. It's the best option. He won't be able to do any damage and Michael won't be able to get to him. It'll be just like it's always been. I don't like that plan, Dean said, crossing his arms. His wings fidgeted as he had to keep adjusting to find a comfortable position. Jesus. There can't be more growth already. He shouted as he looked over his shoulder. Everything looked the same. He faced forward again, catching Gabriel and Sam's alarmed expressions and Castiel's guilty one. He narrowed his eyes. Why didn't you say anything about this? He asked, jabbing his thumb over his shoulder at his wings. I didn't want you to react badly, Castiel replied. I was afraid you might try to damage them. Shut up, Dean said as Sam sniggered. He scratched his head as he stared at Castiel, accepting Castiel's apologies and through his grace. So for my own good. Fine. Whatever. Why are you even here? I thought you were looking for God. Good luck with that, Gabriel snorted. Castiel sent Gabriel a dirty look. Bobby prayed to me, he replied as he looked around. He was afraid you were going to fall off a wagon. But I don't see any wagons. Gabriel broke out in laughter as Sam and Dean managed to stifle their own. Now no, cause he meant Dean chuckled as he shook his head fondly. He wanted you to make sure I didn't eat any monsters. Oh. Castiel looked down in embarrassment. He looked back up as Dean placed a hand on his shoulder and gave him a reassuring grin. Gabriel sidled up to Dean as he looked over Castiel. I have to corrupt him, he said. I think I'm already doing that, Dean replied. Sam gave Castiel a sympathetic smile. Bobby glared at the decanter of whiskey that sat on his desk. As far as peace offerings went, it was certainly a nice one. He looked up, shifting his glare to the angel he had previously known as the trickster. Gabriel offered a wide reassuring smile and Bobby leaned back in his chair. He looked to Sam and Dean for a second opinion. You sure we can trust him? He asked. About as far as I can throw him, Dean said with a shrug. Which is pretty far, despite being a tiny, little thing, Gabriel added happily. In my current state, Dean amended, throwing Gabriel a glare. Tiny? Bobby repeated, looking between Gabriel and Dean. Dean pinched the bridge of his nose as he turned away in frustration as Gabriel chuckled. He means our true forms. I'm about half his size. More like a third, Gabriel sniggered. He grinned as Dean flashed his wings. Just stating facts, Siri. Come on. You're cute. Dean rolled his eyes as he folded and refolded his wings. He just couldn't get them into a comfortable position. He quickly brushed off Gabriel's probing grace, insisting that he wasn't in any pain. Gabriel frowned at Dean's back. No, Siri, this human gig's doing you some good, he said. Dean looked over his shoulder at Gabriel. He turned around and glanced between Sam and Bobby's interested looks. I don't know what you're talking about. Gabriel shook his head in amusement. Just saying you're a lot more pleasant to be around. Don't feel like I have to flee the country ahead of a rampage. He clapped his hands together and grinned eagerly at Sam and Dean. So, what are we doing about the end of the world? We aren't doing anything. Me and Sam have this taken care of, Dean gruffly replied. Nonsense. You need all the help you can get, Gabriel said as he walked across the room and dropped onto the couch. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, Seraphiel. Cause can only cover so much ground and Hess a little limited in what he can do right now. Being high on Zach's most wanted list isn't helping matters. No one's expecting me to help you yahoos. And just how are you gonna help? Sit around and eat sweets? Bobby asked. Dean's got that role covered. Don't need another lazy angel on my hands. Don't compare me to him, Dean snapped. I have an excuse. Look, I know you guys don't like me, but I can help, Gabriel insisted. You're still taking jobs, right? That's why you came after me. Even with the apocalypse going on, you're still helping folks out. I respect that. I'm just offering my help while Sarah's getting better. I can take out monsters, no problem. We don't need your help. I don't need your help. Dean shouted as he advanced on the smaller angel. He stopped as Sam gently took his arm and pulled him aside. Dean, we already discussed this, Sam said quietly. He wants to help. That's a good thing, right? Then he can stay here and do research or go out and find out what Michael's plans are, Dean grumbled as he shrugged Sam off. Cause has Michael covered, Gabriel said. Besides, he wants someone keeping an eye on you. How about you two switch places? Dean said petulantly. Cause is under the impression that that would be a little counterproductive. Gabriel replied as he nudged Dean's grace, sending perverse comments. He chuckled as Dean rolled his eyes. Come on, Siri. It'll be just like old times. Oh. Think of it like when you were earning your blade. Only this time I'm your mentor. Nice, huh? Dean scoffed as he crossed his arms. Yeah, I've been a trickster too long. I'm not making deals with you, and I ain't playing your games. Even if Gabriel reached into his coat and pulled out a slim gleaming blade, I gave you this for graduation. Dean's breath caught and he stumbled forward, staring at the blade in Gabriel's hand. That's as that he reached forward, but Gabriel quickly moved his hand out of reach. You have to prove you're worthy first, Gabriel said as he tucked the blade away. Where did you get that? Dean demanded, jabbing at Gabriel's grace, trying to find answers. Oz gave it to me, Gabriel replied. Said he didn't want anyone finding it if he got caught. Dean's breath came quickly as he held out his wings threateningly. Give it back, he said quietly. He winced and fell to his knees as Gabriel's grace enveloped around him and forced him down. Not until you can tap into heaven's power, Gabriel said as he stood over Dean. He shook his head sadly as he looked down at Dean's cringing form. Look at you, Seraphiel. You don't stand a chance against anyone right now. You're gonna get yourself killed. Or worse, the people you love. Do you want that? Do you want Sam to die because of you? He asked quietly as he crouched down and laid his hand on Dean's shoulder. I'm putting my faith in you, little brother. I'm trusting that you can actually make things better. You're in a position to either save the world or destroy it, don't screw us over by being a dumbass. Dean gave a small nod and Gabriel's grace shifted to a gentle hold. He allowed Gabriel to help him stand and gave him a miserable stare. How had his life become so complicated so quickly? He accepted the soft reassurances that drifted across his grace. There was gentle pressure and curiosity focused on the mark left by Lucifer, and Dean let out a quiet sigh. You actually think Cascamel work? You think heaven's power is open to me? He asked. He reached out with his grace and could just make out the form of his blade. It felt so familiar and foreign at the same time. Now that he thought about it, he wasn't entirely certain that he wanted it back. Trust me, it's been at least a century since anyone was actually paying attention to who was tapping in, Gabriel replied. Everything's changed so much. I mean, look at what's going on with communications. He said, gesturing to the empty air around him. These younger angels have forced everyone onto different airwaves. Dad had to make them quick to make up for the losses, and akin to shows. They don't understand the old dialects. They can't even use the original systems. Don't know if I'm following this right, but can you use that to your advantage? Sam asked. He shrugged when the pair of angels turned their attention to him with matching blank expressions. Just a thought. No, you're right, Dean said. Kaz has trouble understanding me sometimes, but Hess catching on. So what are we talking about? Bobby asked. Shakespeare to modern English. I don't think that's gonna cover your asses for long. More like Old English, Dean replied. I could try to help Kaz out with getting him onto old school angel radio. If no one's listening, then it'd definitely give us a leg up. Only problem would be that Mikey and Lucifer have access, too, Gabriel pointed out. And almost half of heaven. The lone way to find out. Dean closed his eyes and concentrated. To his relief, it was a lot easier to access the old angelic communication system than the current one. He sent out a brief message and grinned as Gabriel groaned. You wanna go see if anyone shows up? Yeah, it'll be back in a couple hours, Gabriel grumbled before vanishing. What was that about? Sam asked. Sent a little message, Dean replied. Something along the lines of him chilling next to the Lincoln Memorial, and I know where to find the Winchesters. First come, first served. And Gabriel's gone to see if anyone shows up, Bobby said, nodding his approval. And if someone does? Then we stick to phones, Dean replied with a shrug. I don't even know if Kaz can connect. Sending a prayer would work, but you never know who might intercept it. And there'd be a bunch of red flags if someone started praying to me, so that's not an option. Hell. If I knew that, I wouldn't pray to Kaz. Bobby said, slamming his hand on top of the desk. No, praying to Kaz is fine. They're expecting that, and they know he wants to keep me and Sam safe, Dean explained. Just don't give out our location. You angels figure out your radio frequencies or whatever. It'll be using a phone from here on out, Bobby said as he picked up the bottle of whiskey that sat on the desk. Should I be expecting any more long-lost relatives of yours showing up? Dean quickly shook his head. Gabriel was the only runaway. And probably the only one that's gonna be willing to help us. What about Anna? Sam asked. She's on lockdown, Dean replied. So I don't think she's gonna be much help. So we're back to where we were, Bobby said as he leaned back. We might be up an angel, but I sure ain't gonna trust him. Gabriel stood up from the bench he had been sitting on. 2 hours had passed and there had been no signs of another angel. He unfurled his wings and was about to take off when an all too familiar presence made him freeze. His breaths came quickly as he slowly turned. There was a man leaning nonchalantly against a tree. He was framed by 3 pairs of beautiful, shimmering white wings. The angel locked eyes with him and he felt the gentle curiosity of the others, grace lightly probing him. Gabriel's heart ached as he swallowed. Quickly, he locked away everything he knew from the inquisitive angel. In a moment, he stood in front of the angel and cocked his head to the side, grinning. "Lucifer. Long time no see." Gabriel held his breath as Lucifer's grace tentatively caressed him. He shivered but stood his ground, refusing to run away. "It has been a long time," Lucifer eventually said. "Too long. So you're out. That's an ease," Gabriel said as he let Lucifer's grace wrap around him in a warm hug. He sighed and closed his eyes at the loving warmth he felt radiating from the fallen angel. "Yes, it is quite enjoyable," Lucifer agreed. He looked around at the humans milling about. "Although, this infestation seems to have worsened, they do breed rather quickly." "Why are you here, Lucifer?" Gabriel asked. He tried to pull his grace from Lucifer's, but found it to be a much harder task than he thought it would be. He frowned as he realized that Lucifer was not even looking for any information, just basking in the comfort of his grace. "For the same reason as you, I believe," Lucifer replied. "I heard Seraphiel's call. He was there when I was released, but he was taken from me." He sneered as a pair of teenagers ran past. "You haven't seen him, have you? Siri?" "Nope." Lucifer turned his gaze to Gabriel and smiled. "Do not lie to me, Gabriel. Where is he?" "That's busy." "Doing what?" "That ox." Lucifer's brows came together in confusion. "Detox." He sifted through his vessel's memories, looking for the relevant information. "Why would you require that?" Gabriel cursed himself for letting the small bit of information slip. He was hopped up on demon juice. "Has recovering. I see this ISA tester a trap." "Not really either," Gabriel admitted. He could feel no ill intent coming from Lucifer, so he decided to be honest. "Just checking who's listening in on the old lines." Lucifer nodded in understanding. "The silence was quite startling when I was released. And there are quite a few angels running around that I have never met. They aren't very polite." "Yeah. Kids these days," Gabriel said with a shrug. How many have you killed?" "5, so far. Michael's attempt to keep me from my true vessel as he tries to claim his own. These Winchester boys are not making Michael very happy." "They have a knack for messing up plans," Gabriel agreed with a smile. "Doesn't matter. I can wait. I certainly have more patience than Michael," Lucifer said. His gaze drifted over the gathered humans and rested on an older couple holding each other. "He seems intent on fighting our battle exactly as it is written. I am certain that if I were to attempt fighting him in this vessel, he would drag Sam Winchester to the battlefield and wait until he gave in." Gabriel laughed as he smirked. "If that's the case, then is he in for a surprise?" Lucifer turned his attention to Gabriel and let his curiosity float along their connection. "Shit." Gabriel raised his eyes to meet Lucifer's and flinched as his cheek was cupped. "Two can't tell you what I know. Just that nothing is gonna go down like it was written." "What do you mean?" "Gabriel, what happened?" "I think Dad has other plans." "Plans he didn't tell us," Gabriel said quietly. "And Seraphiel's role?" Lucifer asked. He stroked Gabriel's grace lovingly. Gabriel bit his lip as he let his grace curl around Lucifer. He had missed the comfort of another angel, and Seraphiel was reluctant to show affection. He wants to put a stop to this. And how does he hope to accomplish that? Gabriel breathed slowly and suddenly ripped his grace out of Lucifer's hold. "By any means necessary. Even if it means your death." Lucifer raised his chin as he studied Gabriel. "But only as a final measure. Do you really think he would be able to kill me?" "If he doesn't, then I will," Gabriel insisted. He took a step back as Lucifer's eyes narrowed. "I mean it, Lucifer. I love you with all my being, but this can't go on." "I see." Lucifer remained silent as he thought. "So now that your little test is over, I assume there will be silence again." Gabriel looked away and clenched his eyes shut as his grace was carefully touched. He felt such loneliness coming from Lucifer. He wanted to wrap his brother in his arms and whisper promises that everything would be alright. He held his breath as Lucifer's hand lightly stroked his arm. He opened his grace to Lucifer and gasped as he was flooded with so many conflicting emotions. Only in Seraphiel had he ever felt such strong emotion. Love and hate warred against each other. There was so much jealousy over their father's love for humans, yet so much devoted love and adoration for their father. There was no hatred for their father and his decision to exile then lock Lucifer away. Only a hatred for the ungrateful humans that surrounded them. Gabriel tightly folded his wings and hugged himself as he steadied his breathing, concentrating hard to keep certain thoughts from Lucifer's prying gaze. He thought he had managed to keep everything well hidden until Lucifer spoke. Lucifer pulled away, staring curiously at Gabriel. "I would appreciate it if you and Seraphiel would keep in touch," he said quietly. "On the old channels." "Yeah, I guess we can do that. I can, at least." "Dunno if Sarah's gonna be up to that," Gabriel replied. Lucifer nodded and turned away, spreading his wings. "I have matters to attend to. If you wish to speak, do not hesitate." Gabriel unfurled his wings and let out a shaky sigh after Lucifer left. So much for that idea, he muttered before taking off. Lucifer landed in the old building he had taken over. He glanced dismissively at the few demons that were scattered around the open room. One demon in particular caught his eye. The one that had been serving as a messenger to Seraphiel. Meg. Meg spun and stared wide-eyed at Lucifer. "No messages," she said quickly. "Did you want to send one?" "No, I need information." "Anything?" she said with an eager smile. "Find out everything you can on the angel Castiel," Lucifer said. "Castiel? Hess, the one that dragged Dean Winchester out of hell," Meg said. "Word is, Hess Dean's personal guardian angel." With her knowledge of Dean's true identity, she could easily read between the lines of what that meant. Lucifer frowned in thought. He had found bits of Gabriel's memories on the young angel. God's final angel, made specifically for Seraphiel. An angel so important that he had called Gabriel back to heaven. So important, he had been saved from death. He had even found the traces of Gabriel's confusion over Seraphiel and Castiel's unique bond. He needed to find out more about this angel. Make sure that he posed no threat to Seraphiel. He would rather lose Seraphiel to another's love than lose him to heaven's trickery. "Find him for me." Meg nodded and half expected the pull of the contract to stop her, but she felt nothing. "No problem," she said with a small grin. Gabriel landed in Bobby's study and looked around. He cast about, searching for Seraphiel, but only found the older human's presence in the kitchen. He appeared in the kitchen, causing Bobby to jump and curse at him. He tried looking for the telltale voids that the sigils carved on Sam and Dean's ribs left, but he still found nothing. "Where'd they go?" he asked. "Got a text. Said it was real important," Bobby replied. "Important?" Gabriel narrowed his eyes at Bobby. "Is this some excuse to get away from me?" "No, it's not," Bobby said as he pushed past Gabriel. "That damned prophet got himself in a fix. The address is on the fridge." He turned to face the angel, but found the room behind him empty. He pulled out his phone and dialed Sam. "Hey. Yeah, Hess on his way." "No. Didn't get a chance to ask." Sam sighed as he hung up and faced Dean. "Gabriel's on his way. No word on angel radio, though." "One way to test that," Dean said apprehensively. He knew he should wait until he heard from Gabriel, but he was impatient and eager. He sent out a short message and received 2 replies. One from Gabriel telling him to shut up and one from Lucifer demanding answers. Sam braced himself as the car swerved. "Dean. Hey, watch it." His heart beat erratically as the Dean pulled off to the side of the road. Dean gripped the steering wheel tightly as he breathed raggedly. Lucifer's voice rang in his head, constantly interrupted by Gabriel. "Dean? Dean?" Sam shook Dean's shoulder until his brother let out a sharp gasp and released his hold of the wheel. "You okay?" he asked in alarm. Dean slowly nodded and swallowed. "I'm fine. Peachy." "Dean?" He shook his head and stared out the window. "I cut off my connection. I'm not ready to talk to Lucifer one-on-one just yet." Sam sucked in a breath, his mind racing. What did he say? Dean frowned as he thought back. He was asking about cause, he said. He had been so shocked that he hadn't really been listening. "I think was concerned." He looked at Sam in confusion. And then he started bitching at Gabriel. "That's when I cut the cord." "Why would he?" "I don't know. I didn't ask." Dean sighed in frustration. "This whole thing's messed up and keeps getting worse. And now Chuck's in trouble. I hate prophets." "Look at the bright side, at least he didn't put anything about you bind you in the books," Sam said as they continued on their way. Dean grunted in agreement. "Still sucks." After a few moments of heavy silence, he glanced at Sam out of the corner of his eye. "Do you think we could get any royalties?" Dean hurried out of the car and to the trunk. His body begged for sleep, but this was an emergency. They needed to. Dean paused, his hand on the trunk as he noticed the line of cars, identical to his own Impala. Curiously, he reached out and found the building to be haunted, full of humans, and no sign of Gabriel. "Do you know what we're dealing with?" Sam asked as he came up from the other side of the car, his eyes lingering on the matching black cars. "Ghosts, but that's not really an emergency, is it? And where the hell is Gabriel?" Dean growled as he pushed away from the car. "I'm incognito." A voice replied from behind them. "You're not the only one that can hide his grace." The brothers turned to face Gabriel, who was decked out in the exact outfit they had originally met him in and sucking on a large sucker. "What the fuck are you wearing?" Dean asked incredulously, sneering at the outfit. "Aw, come on, guys. This'll be great. We're so gonna win the costume contest," Gabriel said delightedly. "Costume contest," Sam repeated. He looked at Dean, who looked just as confused as he felt. "So help me, Gabriel, if this is some sort of fucked up trick." Dean let the threat hang as he prodded Gabriel's grace with the unsaid promises. "Not a trick, but that prophet's I dunno. There's something off about him," Gabriel said. He rolled his eyes at the sarcastic look he received from Dean. I mean more off than usual. Something's not right about him. You saying Hess a fake prophet or something? Dean asked, crossing his arms as he looked up the path to the hotel. Gabriel shook his head. No, Hess just different. Come on. You're gonna love this. He said as he led the way up to the hotel. They found Chuck Shirley pacing nervously at the bottom of a set of steps leading to the hotel. Chuck. Sam called out, drawing Chuck's attention. There you are. Eyes. Dean glared at Chuck as he drew closer. Chuck, what's going on here? What? Nothing. You know, just hanging. What are you guys doing here? Chuck hastily replied. His eyes swept over the trio and landed on Gabriel. Who Gabriel? SHH. The trickster. Gabriel whispered conspiratorially. Y'all spoil the sequels. Dean pushed Gabriel back. You told us to come, he said. No, I didn't, Chuck replied. Yeah, you did, Sam argued as he stepped closer. You texted me. This address. Life or death situation. Any of this ringing a bell? I didn't send you a text, Chuck insisted. We drove all night. Dean felt Gabriel's gray settle over him soothingly and he tried to brush it off. He huffed in irritation as he was forced to be comforted. He calmed and crossed his arms, glaring at Chuck. I'm sorry. I don't understand what could no. Chuck's eyes widened in realization, then closed his eyes as his shoulders sagged. What? Dean asked. He didn't have long to wonder as a familiar face appeared at the top of the steps. Sam. You made it. Sam looked up at the feminine squeal and winced. Oh, Becky, right? He asked warily. Becky quickly descended the steps. You remembered. You've been thinking about me, she said huskily as she eyed Sam. It's okay, she said before Sam could respond, I can't get you out of my head, either. Becky, did you take my phone? Chuck asked in irritation. I just borrowed it from your pants, Becky replied, not taking her eyes off of Sam. Becky. What? They're going to want to see it. See what? Sam and Dean asked in unison. Oh, my God. I love it when they talk at the same time. Hey Chuck. Come on, pal. It's showtime, a man said from the top of the stairs. Becky giddily ran back up the steps, vanishing from sight, and Chuck turned to Sam and Dean. Guys, I'm sorry, he said. For everything. Don't be sorry, man. They're gonna love it. Gabriel promised as he pushed Sam and Dean toward the hotel. They entered the hotel, and Becky immediately sidled up to Sam. A heavised man walked by, and he laughed as he looked at Dean. Hey Dean. Looking good. Who the hell are you? Dean shot back. Even with Gabriel's grace soothing him, he was growing more and more agitated. Especially when he realized that the man addressing him was dressed almost exactly as he was. He even wore a duplicate of the small amulet that Sam had given him years before. Dean, too. Duh, the man replied before walking off. Dean looked at Sam in confusion and noticed the scarecrow god they had faced. He flashed his wings on reflex, feeling cornered and disoriented, but there was no reaction as it drew closer, carrying a soda. Uh-oh. It's Sam and Dean. A slightly muffled voice cried out. I'm in trouble now. Dean quickly scanned the scarecrow and found it to be just a man in costume. He breathed heavily as Gabriel poked delightedly at his grace, pointing out other costumed individuals. Dean recognized each and every one as a monster they had faced or someone dressed as himself or Sam. What? Becky, what is this? Sam asked. It's awesome. Becky exclaimed, Gabriel nodding in agreement. A supernatural convention. The first ever. Sam frowned in displeasure as he looked around at the costumed people milling about. He nudged Dean when he noticed suspicious shadows being cast on the walls around them. Dean, he whispered. Wings. Dean startled and quickly tucked his wings away. He watched in shock and horror as Gabriel jogged up to a fake Sam and Dean. He reached out to Gabriel's grace, needing something solid to cling to in all the confusion surrounding him. He sighed as Gabriel's grace wrapped around him, promising that everything was going to be alright. He looked at Sam and grimaced. Sometimes, he just didn't get humans. I don't like this. By the end of the small Q&A session, Dean was furious. He paced back and forth, ignoring the compliments of looking just as how some people imagined Dean to look. By the fifth request for a photo, the lights around him began to flicker. Sam pulled Dean aside and nodded to where Chuck and Becky were sitting. This is messed up. Dean said in a hushed tone. Gabriel's a socializing. Hess enjoying this. Sam stopped them before they reached the table and watched as the light above them began to dim. Dean, are your powers coming back? Or is this being caused by a ghost? Dean followed Sam's gaze, his brows furrowed. He cocked his head to the side and took a calming breath and the light returned to normal. It's me, he replied. Ghosts are laying low. Which is probably a good thing. So you're doing better? Dean shrugged, momentarily distracted. Just 'cause I can turn a light off doesn't mean I can take out a ghost. Unless I sap it, he said bitterly. Which I'm not allowed to do. Gabriel's keeping a close eye on me. He keeps fawning over everyone's costumes. Believe me, this is a running commentary I could really do without. Sam smirked as they continued toward the table. At least you can drink. Not much of a vice when it doesn't really affect you. At least I'm low enough that it won't take near as much as normal, Dean grumbled. He cringed as Becky's attention landed on Sam. As amusing as it was, he just wasn't in the mood. Hearing about the future publishing of more books had effectively ruined his night. Possibly his life. He grabbed Chuck's drink and downed it in one go. Right. In case you haven't noticed, our plates are kind of full, okay? He said, the frustration he felt clear in his voice. Dealing with Lucifer? Not exactly high on my easy-to-do list right now. Dealing with anything is not easy right now. Hell, at least we have the knife, but it'd be nice if we still had the Colt, so you know what? Add that to our to-do list. We don't have time for this crap. Hey, I didn't call you. Chuck said defensively. He means the books, Chuck, Sam pointed out. Why are you publishing more books? For food and shelter. Chuck replied as if it were obvious. Who gave you the rights to our life story? Dean said as he loomed over Chuck. An archangel, and I didn't want it. Chuck leaned away and looked to Sam for support. Well, deal's off, okay. No more books, Sam said as Chuck looked away. Our lives are not for public consumption, he said, glancing at Becky. Chuck followed Sam's gaze and sighed. Becky. Would you excuse us for a second? Becky nodded and watched in surprise as Dean grabbed Chuck by the collar and dragged him away. Chuck stumbled as Dean released him in one of the back hallways. Do you guys know what I do for a living? Yeah, Chuck. We know, Sam said wearily. Then could you tell me? 'Cause I don't, alright. I'm not a good writer. I've got no marketable skills. I'm not some hero who can just hit the road and fight monsters, okay? Chuck said miserably. Until the world ends, I gotta live, alright. And the supernatural books are all I've got. What else do you want me to do? A scream echoed through the building, and Sam and Dean looked to each other. Acting on instinct, they ran toward the source. No, guys. Wait. It's not never mind. Sam and Dean ran upstairs and found a young woman crouching in the corner of a hallway. Hey, are you okay? Sam asked as he helped her up. He glanced at Dean, and Dean shook his head, shrugging. I think so, the woman said shakily. What happened? Dean asked as he drew closer, looking around. There was no sign of a ghost. The only thing he could think of was that the woman had been spooked or accosted by a guest. I saw a ghost, she replied. Dean looked at her doubtfully. Really? Kinda hard went there, he winced as Sam jabbed him in the ribs, hard. A forced gruff voice spoke up and Dean looked to see the heavised man from earlier. A ghost? Could you tell us what it looked like? The man asked dramatically. Dean looked at Sam and pulled a face. It wasn't a ghost, he insisted. The woman. She was in an old-fashioned dress. Really old. Like a schoolmarm or something, the woman explained. Another man from the slowly gathering group spoke up. Did she say something to you? The woman smiled excitedly. She faced the group and gestured for them to come closer as she raised her voice. Gather close, everybody, for a terrifying tale of terror. I saw a ghost. Dean pulled Sam away, ignoring Sam's confused, stumbling steps. The whole thing was some sort of joke. He was beyond irritated, and his irritation only grew as he looked up, seeing Becky running up to them. Ew. The LARPing started. Becky said, smiling happily at the group behind Sam and Dean. What the fuck is a LARPing? Dean growled, the lights flickering and casting shadows of his wings across the walls. Sam warned, placing his hand on Dean's arm. Live action role-playing. It's a game, Becky explained. The convention puts it on. She held out a piece of paper to Sam. Sam took the paper and read over it, his face scrunching up in confusion. He glanced at Dean and read it aloud. Dad's journal. Dear Sam and Dean, Dean rolled his eyes, this hotel is haunted. You must hunt down the ghost. Interview witnesses, discover clues, and find the bones. First team to do so wins a $50 gift card to Sizzler. Love, Dad. Dean took the paper from Sam and read over it. Love, Dad. So authentic, he said sarcastically. You guys are so gonna win, Becky confided. They watched Becky walk off and Dean crumpled the paper in his hand. Smoke and embers drifted up as the paper burned away in his fist. Sam and Dean watched the crowd as the con manager spoke to them. Dean crossed his arms as he leaned against the wall. Well, the story matches the ghosts here. 4 kids and a woman. So they're having their fake ghost hunt in an actual haunted hotel, Sam said, shaking his head. That's just asking for trouble. Yeah, I wonder what would happen if me and Gabe just sorta flew under the radar for a bit. Let them meet the little ghosties, Dean said, a smirk slowly forming as he spoke. Dean? What? Let them live out their fantasy. See that it ain't all it's cracked up to be, Dean said defensively as he gestured to the group. They're just having fun, Sam said half-heartedly. He looked over as the two men that had questioned the fake witness walked by. Dad said he said I may have to kill you, the fake Dean said. Kill me? What the hell does that mean? Asked the fake Sam. I don't know. Oh. Dean and Sam looked at each other and Dean cast his eyes down, the memory of his confession of his original plans for the Winchester family renewed. I need a drink, they both said. The brothers were leaning against the bar, watching as pairs of Sams and Deans wandered back and forth, discussing where they could find the bones of the ghost. Dean visibly sagged as Gabriel walked up to them, followed closely by the fake Sam and Dean from earlier. Hey, guys. Gabriel greeted cheerfully. Meet, will you? Dean stared at Gabriel in displeasure, sending the prickliest sensations he could muster along to Gabriel. Fine. Gabriel rolled his eyes and threw his hands up. Demian and Barnes, he said, gesturing to the two men. Kids, Sam and Dean, or Samuel and Siri. Dean narrowed his eyes at Gabriel. What are you doing? He asked evenly. Making friends. Gabriel replied. He leaned against Dean and wrapped his arm around the other angel. Come on, Siri. You should love this. You know all about pretending to be something you're not. Dean shrugged Gabriel off and turned to face the bar and his drink. Then go have fun with your new friends. Did you know they found a map to where Miss Gore is buried? Gabriel said conversationally. Pretty interesting that it leads to the cemetery and not the basement. What? Hey. We didn't tell you that. Demian exclaimed. He paused then schooled his features before repeating himself with a much gruffer voice. We didn't tell you that. Oh, come on. That thing's so covered with ghost residue, even Siri can sense it, Gabriel replied dismissively, ignoring the warnings wafting from Dean. Wait, is this part of the hunt? Barnes asked slowly. Are we winning? Gabriel put on a bright smile as he faced the two LARPers. Sure, why not? Anyway, seems like some of these ghosts want mommy dearest gone. Something about not having any fun. Yeah. That's exactly what he said. Barnes said, nodding. We should look into it. See if anyone knows what he was talking about. Do some research. I'll need my laptop. Sam slouched on the bar stool. Dean must have seen the sickened look on his face because he found a bottle of beer being pressed into his hand. And why would any ghost be talking about having fun? Dean bit out, staring accusingly at Gabriel. Gabriel glanced at Dean and shrugged. I was curious. Reined it in a bit and got a couple bites, he explained. I dunno about you, but when one kid's bitching about not having fun, tries to string you up by your heels, and then mommy comes along and chants naughty, naughty, naughty that just screams crazy kids got put down. Not to mention, between those kids is stretched pretty thin. Running on instinct, now. I say salt and burn the lot of them. Put 'em out of everyone's misery. Dean turned in his stool to face Gabriel fully, a thoughtful look on his face. You wanna help? Well could be fun to be on the other side of the fight. You know they can still hear you. Heard your whole plan, Dean said. His grace poked at Gabriel for making such an amateur mistake not quite playfully, but nowhere near as serious as he had been feeling earlier. What are they gonna do? Lock us in. Gabriel said sarcastically. He grinned as a burst of energy ran through the hotel. Apparently, that is their plan. Demian and Barnes had been watching the conversation, trying to keep up. In a few whispers, they came to the conclusion that they had managed to get a leg up in the LARP. We should find a way out and find those bones, Demian declared. Dean looked between the LARPers and Gabriel. Really? He said disbelievingly. Gabriel crossed his arms as he shifted his weight. Oh, lay off. They're cool. Sam leaned closer to Dean and whispered. Besides, isn't that what you wanted? Give everyone a taste of reality. Dean sighed as he reluctantly nodded. So what's the plan? Let these two dweebs dig up a couple graves. He could just imagine the pair of young men sweating and getting covered with dirt and mud, miserable in the night air. Actualium all for handing over physical labor. Have fun. He turned back to his drink, a large smile plastered across his face. Keep 'em distracted. I'll keep an eye on these two, and you am keeping a close eye on you, Gabriel warned as he escorted Demian and Barnes toward the main entrance, telling them a made-up story of Letitia and the children. Tuck looked up and groaned at the sight of Sam and Dean swiftly approaching. Now what? We need everyone out of the way, Sam said. Out of the well, I'm doing a Q&A in about 5 minutes, Chuck replied. That lasts over long you need it to. Depends on if Gabriel's playing nice or not, Dean said. He reached out, but the other angel was out of his range. With a sigh, he opened up his link to Angel Radio. He winced at the conversation he had inadvertently walked into. Come on, Lucy. It'd be fun, Gabriel said enticingly. I do not see how any form of human entertainment would beffen, Lucifer replied. You get to pretend to be someone else. There are so many conventions out there. We could do some sci-fi stuff. Or comic books. We can start you off easy with a murder mystery party. Gabriel, I will not partake of your foolishness, Lucifer replied, his voice laced with the barest hint of amusement. Dean took a deep breath before cutting in. First off, Lucifer, do not let Gabriel talk you into LARPing. Second, Gabriel, how long do you need? Seraphiel. Seraphiel, are you well? Gabriel said. I didn't say anything. Siri, don't listen to him. You said he was recovering. Lucifer argued before directing his attention back to Seraphiel. But he refuses to say any more on the subject. Thank you, Gabriel, Dean said sarcastically. He sighed and caught Sam and Chuck giving him questioning stares. He waved them off before turning away and back to his conversation. Yes, Imphine. Good enough. Will you speak with me? Lucifer asked. Will you stop this stupid apocalypse? Dean retorted with a harsh tone. He was met with silence. He closed his eyes and pressed his forehead against the wall. He probably shouldn't have been so rude. Not when he wanted to sway Lucifer's intentions. Sam touched his arm and he pushed off the wall. He had more important things to do than mope around about Lucifer. Gabriel? How long? I dunno, Gabriel quietly replied. We're almost there. I'm gonna let them be big boys. Dig up some graves, but I can feel the ghosts are also tied to the cemetery. So however long it takes a human to dig up a grave. They feel kinda shallow. It'll jump in if they get in over their heads. Right. Well, try to keep them busy here. Dean cut his connection and turned to face Chuck and Sam. Okay, so we need you to keep everyone in that room for Abathel a couple hours or so. Think you can do that? Chuck nodded grimly. Yeah. Sure. No problem. Probably even go over, he replied. These people are wolves. Vicious, hungry, fanatical wolves. And who do you have to blame for that? Dean asked. He looked down the hall as he heard voices approaching. Whatever. Your audience is showing up. Me and Sam will salt the entrances. You do your thing. Gabriel sighed as he watched Demian struggle with a lighter while Barnes waved a shovel through a ghost's head. This was getting tedious. He checked his watch. 5 more minutes then he would take over. And where would the fun be in that? A little boy appeared in front of him, brandishing a knife and a wicked grin. Gabriel tilted his head and raised a brow. Do it and I'll stick that knife so far up your ass, you'll salt and burn yourself. The ghost faltered and frowned at Gabriel in confusion. He screeched as his being burned away, revealing the startled faces of Demian and Barnes. Gabriel grinned and clapped his hands. Hey. You did it. Just like real hunters, you too. Congratulations. It was real, Demian said weakly, leaning against Barnes. Barnes nodded and wrapped his arm around Demian's shoulders. Let's never do that again. Oh, come on. Gabriel said as he left his perch from atop a tombstone. You guys did a great job. A few close calls, but you handled it a lot better than some other amateurs I've seen. Who are you? Barnes asked. Now, if I told you who I am, then it'd be giving away spoilers, Gabriel replied. Let's just say I'm a fan of the supernatural books. Something of a CI, if you will. But, hey. You won the really special prize of the evening. Gabriel snapped his fingers and a pair of cards appeared in his hand. How's about $200 gift cards to the Sizzler? Much nicer than just 50. Squeeze in a few more dates that way, he said looking between the pair. Demian nodded wordlessly as he accepted the gift cards. It would hardly make up for the nightmares he was positive he and Barnes would end up having, but it was a start. Gabriel waved to Demian and Barnes as the pair slowly trudged away to their room. He sighed and reached out for Dean, making sure to send an irritated jab along their connection. He received a half-hearted response and frowned. In an instant, he stood in front of Sam and Dean, causing Sam to jump back and shout in surprise. What's wrong with you? He asked as he looked over Dean. I'm fine, Dean replied as he turned his back on Gabriel. I'm just tired. That why you sent those creepy kids my way? Gabriel gently stroked Dean's grace, looking for any sign of injury or stolen energy. He felt relieved upon finding Dean to be clean. They were kind of a handful, Sam replied. They got into the conference room and Chuck actually managed to fend them off. That's when I flashed my wings, Dean added. He shrugged at the hard look Gabriel gave him. Hey, I'm running on empty here. Haven't slept since. Don't give me that. You don't need sleep. I do, Dean bit out. Now, as I was saying, I have no energy right now. I'm nodding off every time I sit down. I don't have the juice to keep this body awake any longer. With a heavy sigh, he opened up his grace to Gabriel and let the other angel poke around to see for himself. Geez, Siri, why didn't you say anything? Gabriel asked. He looked up at Sam and caught the knowing and amused smirk. Right. Still the same, then. Some things never change, huh? Look, I just want to get some sleep, alright. You were taking forever and I knew you could handle a couple ghosts better than I could, Dean explained. He broke off in a yawn and scratched his head. If it bugs you that much, we can talk about it in the morning. Gabriel nodded as Dean pushed past him. He looked back at Sam and quirked a smile. So, Mr. Prophet whacked himself a ghost. That must have been impressive. Or hilarious. Dean stretched and flexed his wings in the morning sun. He had to admit, Demian and Barnes were okay for a couple of strange humans. They were honest, happy, and saw the silver lining in his crappy life that he had forgotten. As much as he was willing to die for Sam, Sam was just as willing to return the favor. Not only did he have Sam and Bobby, but he also had Castiel and Gabriel. He hoped that he could soon count Lucifer in the ranks of his small, but beloved, family. He chewed his lip as he made his way down the hotel steps and walked slowly toward his car. As he took a deep breath, he reopened his connection to the old Angel radio and sent out a message. He drew closer to the car and saw Gabriel leaning against it, giving him a sad smile. "Shut up," he said gruffly and opened the trunk. "Come on, Siri. I thought that was sweet. You opened up your heart. And, admittedly, you're a little less persistent about humanity's greater qualities than I was. But maybe this is a step in the right direction," Gabriel said with a shrug. "Kill him with kindness and all that jazz." "I don't want to kill him. Don't want it to end that way," Dean whispered as he tossed his bag into the trunk. He stared at the scattered weapons. He hadn't closed his connection to Angel radio, but he had yet to hear a reply. He stiffened as Gabriel's gray settled comfortingly over him. They looked up as they heard Sam call to Dean. "You're not gonna believe it, Beauty got a lead on the Colt," Sam said. He gave a short laugh at Dean's surprised look. "What? How? Where is it?" "Long story," Sam replied, shaking his head as he gestured to the car. "He'll tell you on the way." "Right. What are we waiting for?" Dean glanced back at Gabriel and nodded to the back seat. "You comin' with her heatin' out?" Gabriel grimaced at the car and looked between Sam and Dean. "I guess him coming get the full hunter experience. What better way to round out my adventure than with a stale car ride? How bad is it gonna smell? I have a sensitive stomach." Dean rolled his eyes as he got in the car, bristling against Gabriel's grace and warning him against insulting his baby again, not unless he wanted to know what it was like to be thrown from a moving vehicle. The airwaves were still silent, but at least with his brothers by his side, it was bearable. Lucifer's head snapped up and he stared ahead as Seraphiel's voice rang out. "Lucifer, I do not hate you for pushing me away after our fall. I am actually kinda grateful, now. I never would have grown to love humanity as much as I do, and I just wish I could share that with you. Their capacity for love, for forgiveness, they are so amazing, and they don't deserve this. And, Lucifer, to forgive you. For everything. Please stop at least long enough for us to talk. Listen. I promise. Just talk to me. Please." Lucifer looked around the warehouse he had holed up in. Demons were milling about around him. They were filth, a scum dredged up from the bottom of what humanity had to offer. They actually made normal humans appear like they were worth saving. He narrowed his eyes as one demon gloated to another about a family it had tortured. The demons were restless and high on energies of promised chaos. If he were to change his plan now, things were already getting out of his control. It was one big snowball, rolling down the hill and getting bigger by the second, and he had no hope of stopping it. He could barely even guide it anymore. He turned away and his eyes landed on Meg. Another hopeless follower, but at least she was more intelligent than the others. "Meg." The demon looked up at him with an apprehensive smile. Not the eagerness that the others held. This one still had a sense of self-preservation. Possibly a remnant of her so-called humanity. As much as he wanted her to ask about Seraphiel's current state, he didn't want to risk any of his demonic followers, knowing that Seraphiel wasn't much of a threat at the moment. He would have to settle on an apology for what he was about to do. He hoped it would be accepted. "I need you to get a message to Seraphiel. But you cannot give it to him. Not yet." Dean sat on the couch in silence, staring at the wall as Gabriel and Castiel argued about tracking down the demon Crowley. The moment Sam had mentioned Crowley's name, Dean had been dreading confronting the demon. Crowley had been the closest thing he had to a friend for a couple of centuries, but he wasn't quite sure where Crowley would stand with the apocalypse now that Lucifer was free. Crowley had been the one to show him the contract that had him stuck in hell. Crowley knew who Seraphiel was and yet hadn't exposed him. Yet. Wouldn't the demon have a lot to gain from at least telling Lucifer about him? He tapped his fingers on the couch arm and heaved a sigh. "But where the hell are we gonna find someone that this guy is actually gonna show up to make a deal with?" Gabriel asked in annoyance. "Someone rich or famous," Bobby suggested. "The clean soul. Would they be worth more?" Sam asked. Gabriel shrugged as Castiel stared at the floor. "I'm not a demon. I don't know how they operate," Gabriel said. He glanced at Dean and frowned at his brother's distracted state. He lightly grazed Dean's grace and narrowed his eyes. "You know this bastard. Why didn't you say anything?" Dean groaned and ran a hand over his face. Just cause I know him doesn't mean we're on good terms. I threatened him with a spoon the last time I saw him. But you do know where to find him. And given your past encounters with him, hell listen before going on the offensive, Castile said as he glanced through Dean's memories of the demon. He may not be fully afraid of you, but he is wary. Great. So we sent Siri out to talk with Crowley. If it goes south, me and Castle swoop in and take him out, Gabriel said. I'm going too, Sam declared. No way, kiddo. It'd be better if we kept you away from known demon camps, Gabriel said, shaking his head. Sam's fine coming with me, Dean said. No way. You wanna fuck up the apocalypse. Fine. But that won't happen if you just hand Sam over on a silver platter, Gabriel said with a sharp flap of his wings. And I'm perfectly fine going in. Dean countered. You really think Lucifer won't jump at the chance to take out Michael's vessel? And he has all his demons out looking for me for Seraphiel. But he doesn't want to hurt you, Gabriel pointed out. You'd probably have demonic servants left and right. Dean stood and crossed his arms as he glared at Gabriel. He flashed his wings, breathing evenly through the dull pain of his regrowth. Sam's coming. Gabriel took a step back. He glanced at Castile for support and puffed out his feathers when he found none. Really? You'd trust these idiots with something like this? In the middle of this shitfest? Yes, Castile said simply. Besides, if Dean's memories are correct, then we would be unable to swoop in and assist Dean if things were to go wrong. Crowley's home is heavily warded against angels. Then we can't even send in Siri. Gabriel whined. This plan gets worse by the second. He can get through the warding, Dean quietly admitted, thrusting his hands into his pockets. He looked away from Gabriel's shocked stare. You can. Gabriel tilted his head slightly as he trailed off then looked away. The same way you don't need permission to grab a vessel. Dean nodded, staring at the ground as he withdrew his grace in shame over the actions that had tainted him. He pushed Gabriel's grace aside as it tried to follow. Anyway, I know where to find Crowley. Me and Sam will get the gun. You guys just sit tight. Well, at least let us get you there, Gabriel said. Take less time. Dean grimaced and glanced at Sam. I'd rather not. Sam tried to give Dean an encouraging smile. It'll only take a second, he said. The faster we get the gun, the better. Dean shifted his weight and sighed, eventually nodding. He flexed his wings and wondered if he would be able to fly on his own. That's all well and good, but we don't even know if the gun'll work on Lucifer, Bobby pointed out. We're putting a lot of faith in something that might not work. It's still worth it, Sam replied. Anything that might give us an edge. And if it can't kill Lucifer, then it might be able to kill some of the other things that are cropping up because of the apocalypse. I don't want to kill Lucifer, Dean said tiredly. Not yet, at least, Gabriel added. Only as a last resort. Though I might have to shoot him in the leg. Just on principle, Dean said. Besides, if the gun doesn't work, an angel blade will, but would have to be a lot closer for that. Bobby looked between Dean and Gabriel with his eyes narrowed. And how can we trust you two to do the right thing when the time comes? He asked. Dean glanced at Gabriel and lightly touched his grace. Gabriel looked up and nodded, swallowing. Because it's about time we started doing the right thing, Dean said quietly. Gabriel landed just outside of the location that Dean had given him. He took his hand off Sam's shoulder as he stared up at the high walls surrounding the property. Every inch was covered in anti-angel warding. Wow, this guy does not want any angels visiting. Sam looked around the empty road, frowning. Where are Dean and Kaz? Gabriel looked around in confusion. Good question, he said just before Castile appeared in front of them. What happened? Where's Siri? Dean does not like being carried, Castile replied. Has flying on his own. He was right behind me. He has the strength for that. Gabriel asked as he reached out, trying to sense Dean. He breathed a sigh of relief when he felt Dean quickly approaching. Barely, Castile admitted. He vanished and reappeared several feet away. Dean appeared and stumbled into Castile's open arms. He panted as he leaned heavily into Castile. He hadn't counted on the fresh growth giving him so much trouble. Flying with a pair of torn wings was bad enough, but adding in 4 slowly recovering stumps added in a whole other level of difficulty. He sighed as Castile's gray stroked him encouragingly. Should you really be flying in your condition? Gabriel asked. I'm fine, Dean insisted as he stood up straight. Other than his wings being extremely sore, he felt okay. Still weak, but okay to take on a few demons. Sure you are. You made it in one piece on your own, Sam said. That has to count for something. Yeah. I'm coming along pretty good, Dean said smugly. Hey, I'll be more than happy to join in your little ego-stroking celebration when you can tap into heaven, Gabriel said. Until then, I really think you should be conserving your power. He pulled out Seraphiel's blade and twirled it tauntingly. Especially if you want to see this anytime soon. Castile narrowed his eyes at Gabriel. I did not entrust you with that blade in order to tease Dean with it. Dean patted Castiel's shoulder and shook his head. It's okay. He has a point, he said before facing Gabriel. If I can fly on my own, I'm gonna do it. I don't give a rat's ass how hard it is, I won't be dragged along. Gabriel flapped his wings and pointed the blade at Dean. Stop being so stubborn. This is for your own good. They'll stop being stubborn when you stop being a coward. Dean shouted back, trying to raise his own wings. He only managed to raise one as the rest hung limply. Sam sighed as the lights by the front gate began to flicker, casting shadows of wings along the street. We don't have time for this, he said as he turned away. Castiel laid a hand on Sam's shoulder and nodded to the pair of angels glaring at each other. It's done. Gabriel lowered his wings as he gave Dean a sad look. Not much of a threatening pose with only one wing raised, he criticized. But it'll give you points for looking scary as shit. You sure do fit the fallen angel look, little brother. Still flying on my own, Dean said as he raised his chin defiantly. Gabriel nodded and tucked the blade away. Fine. You earned it. Sam looked between the two in confusion, uncertain of what was going on. What? Would you change your mind? I'm mentoring. Gabriel proudly declared. What? Castiel asked flatly. Dean sighed and winced as he tried to readjust his wings. It's well, things have changed. He looked at Castiel and shrugged. You're too young to understand, he said before facing Sam, and you're too human. Don't worry about it. Me and Gabe have it covered. But mentoring another angel is about kindness and guidance, Castiel argued. No posturing and displays of dominance. Dean and Gabriel shared a look. You've had more contact with heaven than me. How are they doing things nowadays? Dean asked. Well, these new angels are kinda soft, Gabriel said. I'm not. Gabriel continued, ignoring Castiel. As I understand it, mentoring turned into babying, so they won't get hurt. But nothing's ever permanent, Dean said. Builds character. Well, that's what you get with a rush job, Gabriel said with a shrug. Soft angels that can't. I am not soft. Castiel shouted, spreading his wings out as he slammed his grace into Dean and Gabriel, commanding respect. I am a soldier of heaven and will not be so easily dismissed. Dean and Gabriel reflexively lifted their wings, taking a step back. Gabriel brushed along Dean's grace, sending a message. Accept him, Gabriel whispered to Dean's grace. Dad made him different. I think made him like us. Like how angels are supposed to be made. Dean nodded and licked his lips as he gently stroked Castiel's grace, promising that he wasn't brushing Castiel off like he was nothing. Add in the fact he was made for me, whatever that entails. Castiel huffed in annoyance as Dean and Gabriel continued their private conversation. He folded his wings and turned away. Okay, so we agree the cause is like a normal angel, Gabriel said as he looked over the angel in question. He grinned as he sent all the possibilities along his grace to Dean. Has never been initiated. Dean smirked at Gabriel. Don't you mean mentored? He replied. Same thing. Gabriel faced Dean, sniggering at the image Dean had sent him of Castiel walking under a door with a bucket of white paint propped above it. Hell, have to wait until I'm done with you, though, he said aloud. Sam watched as Castiel's expression grew more sour. You guys know you're pissing him off, right? He said, giving Dean an annoyed look. Isn't that the point? Gabriel asked. Dean sighed as he shook his head. No, Sam's right. It's not right if he doesn't understand. He apologetically stroked Castiel's grace and was happy when Castiel returned the gesture. What do I not understand? Castiel asked as he turned back to face Gabriel and Dean. Finding your place in the hierarchy, Dean replied. He shrugged as he glanced at Gabriel. Not much of a hierarchy if it's just us, though. But that's assigned, Castiel said. But you're not immediately respected, are you? Sam asked. Just look at how Uriel treated you. You're not really part of the group. Castiel looked away, unable to argue. See? The human gets it, Gabriel said, waving his hand at Sam. He gave Sam a proud smile, which slipped at the sight of Sam's annoyed frown. The human has a name, Sam retorted. Gabriel shrugged carelessly. Details. Now, enough bickering. You two go get that gun, he said as he gave Dean a light push toward the gate. Sam sighed as he looked over the gate and intercom. It's locked and I don't think they'll just let us in. And I can't hop it and get past the warding in my condition, Dean added. Gotta do this straight up, human. Be better if we had some bait. Do I have to do everything myself? Gabriel walked past Sam and stared at the intercom. Piece of cake. Gabriel's form morphed into a young woman that Sam recognized as Dr. Piccolo from Dean's hospital show. Complete with scrubs. He stepped back as she looked up at him, raising an amused brow. Like what you see, huh? Gabriel said before pressing the call button. Hello. Hi. I'm on my way to this very important conference and, won't you know it, my car broke down. Gabriel replied. It'll be down in a minute, said the voice on the other end. Gabriel grinned at the other three as he stepped back. They didn't have to wait long. The gate swung open and two demons stepped out, looking over Gabriel's false form. "Evening, pretty lady," one said. "Get yourself on in here." Gabriel glanced at the sides of the gate. "If you have a cell phone, that'd be great," he said, taking a step back. "You don't need to call anyone, baby," the demon said, grinning. "We're the only help you're ever gonna need." Gabriel was poked forcefully by Dean's grace, telling him to hurry up. He shifted uncomfortably and took another step back. "Know what? I think I should wait by my car." He turned and grinned triumphantly when a hand landed on his shoulder. "We said, get your ass in here," the demon growled. Gabriel turned slowly and he shifted back into his normal appearance. 3 pairs of golden wings spread out behind him and the demon stared in shock. "Love to, but I can't," he said sadly as he raised his hand to the closest demon's forehead. The other demon turned to flee back to the safety behind the gate, but Sam stood in his way, knife drawn. In one swift movement, the knife was thrust deep into his neck. "Well, that was fun," Gabriel said. He looked at Dean and gave him a questioning stare. "You sure you're okay to do this?" Dean nodded, lifting his shotgun. "There's just a few more demons in there. Nothing we can't handle," he replied. "Stay clean," Gabriel warned. Dean groaned in annoyance as both Gabriel and Castiel's graces warned him against devouring demons. "See on, Sammy," he growled as he led the way. Sam and Dean had already taken out 3 demons inside the mansion. Sam had been worried when Dean had disappeared for a moment, returning with a shit-eating grin. "What did you do?" Sam asked. Dean shrugged nonchalantly. "Did a little rearranging," he whispered as he stretched his senses as far as he could. He could feel 2 more demons approaching from another hallway. He signaled to Sam and Sam nodded as he pressed against the wall. Well, if it isn't the Hardy Boys." Sam and Dean spun around in surprise. Their distraction was all that was needed for the demons that Dean had sensed to disarm and detain them. Dean kept his power well hidden as he glared at Crowley. "You could have just knocked," Crowley said. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small hex bag. "After your last visit, I decided to whip this up. Especially when I heard what your preferred diet had shifted to. So how have you been, Seraphiel?" The demons holding Sam and Dean tensed and they glanced uncertainly at each other before looking to Crowley for more information. They shifted uneasily at the sly grin he wore. "They're all yours," Crowley said, indicating the pair of demons. "Thanks, but I'm on a diet," Dean growled in reply, flashing his wings. The demon holding him released him and he quickly turned and slammed his hand into the demon's forehead, praying that he had enough power. He grinned to himself as a bright white flash erupted and the demon fell lifeless to the floor. He looked over in time to see Sam shove the demon knife into the other demon's gut. He turned to face Crowley and crossed his arms. "So you're off the demon juice," Crowley said in disappointment. He had actually been looking forward to seeing Seraphiel take out his minions in that particular fashion. "Pity. I was looking forward to seeing you work. Is there a specific rehab clinic for that?" "Where's the colt, Crowley?" Dean asked, raising his wings slightly. "You're always so pushy," Crowley complained. Dean stepped forward and Crowley pulled the gun from his coat, pointing it at Dean's head. "Should we find out if this works on angels now or later? That's why you want it, isn't it?" "That's none of your business," Dean replied. He glanced at Sam and shook his head and Sam lowered the knife in annoyance. "Actually, it is my business. You should know that better than anyone. You are, after all, the one who got me into sales," Crowley said. Sam looked at Dean in surprise. Dean caught Crowley smirking at Sam and he glanced to the side. He deflated under Sam's gaze and shrugged. "What? He was fun to drink with," he said defensively. "I couldn't get him out of his contract, but I knew a few demons that could get him a better deal than being put straight on the rack. For which I am eternally grateful," Crowley said as he lowered the gun. He turned the gun around and held it out to Dean. "And in a show of my gratitude here." "Just like that?" Sam asked suspiciously. "You don't want anything?" "Oh, he wants something all right," Dean said, glaring at the colt. He held his hand out, but Crowley pulled the gun away. "I want you to take this thing to Lucifer," Crowley said simply. "And empty it in his face." "You want the devil dead? But you're a demon," Sam said incredulously. "It's called survival." Crowley sighed in annoyance as he looked between Sam and Dean. "Lucifer's still an angel," Dean explained. "Exactly. And Hess an angel famous for his hatred of humankind," Crowley said. "To him, you're just filthy bags of pus. If that's the way he feels about you, what can he think about us?" "But he created you," Sam said uncertainly. "Not all of us. To him, we're lucky if he sees us as servants. We're glorified cannon fodder," Crowley said distastefully. "And once Hess done wiping out humans," Dean trailed off and shook his head. Was Lucifer so far gone that he would just lash out at everyone and everything? He didn't want to believe that Lucifer was beyond saving. "Who do you think will be next on his little to-do list?" Crowley said, finishing Dean's sentence. So, what do you say? Save the whole world. We can all go back to simpler, better times. Back to when we could all follow our natures. He glanced over Dean and frowned. Back to when you in one of your moods was the only real threat. Though, I will say that the plague was good for business. That was an accident. Dean growled. He thrust out his hand and spread his wings to their full span. Just give us the gun. Y'all do it. Y'all kill the devil. Crowley asked. Dean nodded, not trusting his voice. When Crowley made no move to hand the gun over, he gritted his teeth. I swear to God that I will shoot that fucking asshole. Dad knows he deserves it, he said. Crowley gave a curt nod and handed Dean the Colt. Deal. Great. So you wouldn't happen to know where the devil is, by chance, would you? Sam asked as he watched Dean. Thursday, Crowley replied. Bertie tells me there's an appointment in Carthage, Missouri. Dean lifted the Colt and pointed it between Crowley's eyes. Thanks, he said as he pulled the trigger. The gun clicked and Crowley stared back at Dean. Oh, yeah. Right. Y'all probably need some more ammunition, he said in a bored tone. Dean grinned and held up his other hand. He opened it, revealing a handful of bullets. Already helped myself. Hope you don't mind. Crowley breathed in sharply as his eyes widened. Always full of surprises, aren't you? Dean smirked as he began loading the Colt. And you're predictable. I hope you like what I did to your office. He looked back up, surprised when he found Crowley still standing there. As fun as our little games are, this isn't good for my health, Sir Raphael, Crowley said. You fail, and I'm dead. So I won't fail. The study was filled with a tense silence. 3 angels sat on the couch, one straight-backed and proud, the other 2 in varying degrees of embarrassment. Angels, Ellen repeated for what seemed like the 10th time. I can buy that the trickster turned out to be an angel, divine retribution and all that, but Dean. Call an angel, Dean reminded. He shrank back under Ellen's cold stare. You could have saved so many more people. Jo said, shaking her head. Dean nodded and stared at the floor. There was so much more he could have done. Hell, he could have just run away and helped out random strangers. But then he wouldn't have been there for Sam. How would Sam have turned out if he hadn't been there? Or if he had had powers and Sam didn't, would Sam have pursued his psychic abilities even more if he had a brother with powers? Slowly, he brought his head up and met the eyes of the woman standing on the other side of the room, looking down on him in disappointment. It was worth it to keep Sam safe. He needed a brother. As normal a brother he could get, given this life, he said as he stood. He might be human, and I might be an angel, but that don't change the fact that he's still my brother. And you know what? I'd do it all again. Exactly the same. Standing with Lucifer, falling, all the lies, corruption, death, all of it. Every last bit the same if it meant I did even a little right by Sam. Dean swallowed self-consciously as everyone stared at him, but he stood his ground, crossing his arms defiantly. His tension eased as Castiel's grace filled him with love. He looked to Sam and breathed a sigh of relief at the half-smile and nod directed at him. There was movement beside him, and he looked down as Gabriel stood next to him. Since we're having our little angels anonymous meeting, hi, I'm Gabriel, and I ran away from home. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat, Gabriel said with a cocky grin. He deflated a little under Dean's annoyed gaze. Well, past tense, that is. Not right now. I'm not running away this time. I'll believe that when I see it, Bobby said, and Dean nodded in agreement. Oh, don't agree with him. He can't see my grace, Gabriel said huffily, glaring up at Dean. He doesn't know jack squat about my change of character. You, on the other hand, I'm completely exposed to, he said, spreading out his arms. Don't expose yourself too much, you might scare some children, Dean replied. He smirked as Gabriel's arms dropped. Hey. Ellen drew the angel's attention back to herself and placed her hands on her hips. Okay, so we can't change the past, but at least we have a chance with the future, right? You two can make up for your fuck-ups right now, and you're gonna do it by saving the world. That's a tall order, Gabriel said weakly. What's wrong? Too short to fill it. Dean snarked. Gabriel pushed at Dean's grace playfully. Says the tiniest angel in the room. The lights began to flicker, and a nearby bulb in the lamp popped as Dean and Gabriel's graces wrestled. They stopped at the sound of Castiel's commanding voice. Enough. You can play with each other later, he said. He frowned as the pair broke off in snickers, and he rolled his eyes. He looked pleadingly at the humans in the room. I apologize for their behavior. No, it's fine, Ellen said, slowly shaking her head. A lot to take in, but Dean's still Dean. She sighed as she stared at him. Just wish you had done more. And Mackin sure little Blondie was safe isn't good enough. He cold played completely human and not even bothered keeping an eye on her, ready to jump in at the last second. Gabriel asked with a scoff, what's it take to impress you people? What? Ellen and Jo looked at Dean for an answer. Dean shrugged and stuck his hands in his pockets. He had to trace out where Gabriel's Grace had been skimming for information and memories to find out exactly what Gabriel was referring to. Oh. With Holmes I had Joe on my radar the whole time. I was ready to take out that ghost the second he laid a finger on her. Waldo wiped her memory of it though, but she did good on her own. I saved who I could, he said quietly. The ones no one would notice if they got away from an impossible situation. At first there was no way I could get to M in time without revealing who I was. Ellen and Joe shared a look and Ellen nodded. Thank you for that, she said quietly. Guess Gabriel has a point. Yeah, I've been in the thick of it and always take jobs others won't. It'll be good to have an actual heavy hitter on our side for once. Even if you are a recovering addict. Dean withered under her stare. Not as bad as some of the Roadhouse regulars, at least. All right, she eventually said. What do you need us to do? Gabriel and Joe watched as Ellen finally downed the last shot glass in front of her. She grinned across the table to where Castile sat. All right, big boy, she said as she leaned back. Castile stared down at the 5 shot glasses in front of him. Well. There was a not-so-gentle prod from Gabriel. He sighed and picked up the first glass in the line. He drank it and quickly continued with the other 4. He set the final one down and blinked as he felt a twinge of dizziness pass over his vessel. I think I'm starting to feel something, he admitted. Dean and Gabriel had been feeding him beer after beer all night and he had yet to feel anything. He blinked wearily as a mug filled with clear liquid was shoved into his field of vision. He looked up at Gabriel's grinning face and reluctantly took the mug. In the other room, Sam and Dean were seated around Bobby's desk, a map and notes scattered across it. It's gotta be a trap, right? Sam said. I mean, Crowley is a demon, after all. Dean laughed softly as he looked up at Sam. Sam Winchester. Having trust issues with a demon, well, better late than never, he said with a shrug. Thank you for your continued support, Sam dryly replied. You are welcome. And might I say that it's nice to see your rehabilitation coming along smoothly. Dean nodded. 5 weeks dry and counting, he said and lifted the beer bottle he held. He smiled as Sam raised his own and their bottles clinked. Sam sighed as he stared at the papers strewn across the desk. Trapper nodded. It's a bad idea that we're even going. Dean nodded as he leaned back with a heavy sigh. Yeah, Vessel and X, this could go south real fast. You sure you're okay for both of us to go? Sam asked. Not really, Dean admitted. It's a mistake. I know it's a mistake, you know it's a mistake, everyone knows. But we don't have much of a choice. Hess not giving us much of a choice. Whatever Lucifer's got planned, gotta try to stop it. Gotta try and stop him. It was early afternoon when the small group of hunters and angels reached the city limits of Carthage. They had planned for Dean and Gabriel to hide their presence and let it seem like Castile was the only angel. Sam and Gabriel rode with Dean and Castile had eventually been coaxed into the back of Ellen and Joe's car. Dean narrowed his eyes as he drove through another Reaper. Still no signal, huh? Sam shook his head as he stared at his phone. Nothing. The place is completely empty, we should have seen someone by now. Not empty at all, Sam, Gabriel replied. He kept his eye on a nearby cluster of Reapers as the car drove by. Reapers all over the place. This is as good a spot as any, Dean said as he pulled over. He stepped out as Ellen parked next to him. You doing okay in there, Cos? Castile appeared in front of Dean and nodded stiffly. This is not a wise plan. It's the only one we got, Dean replied. And do you really want me and Siri advertising? Gabriel added. He grimaced at the Reapers that surrounded them. I can't be the only one that thinks this is creepy. What? An empty town? Joe asked as she got out of the car. Gabriel shook his head and waved his hand around them. Bunch of old guys staring into space. Something big is going down here. Hounds crawling in Reapers, Dean explained. And I can barely feel Lucifer, just traces. Nothing I can really lock onto without giving myself away. Wish we knew what he had planned. But this amount of Reapers. My guess is extermination, Gabriel said. He lightly touched Dean's grace, sharing his apprehension. He hoped that Lucifer wasn't beyond saving, but with how things looked he sighed as he crossed his arms and looked up the street. Whatever's going on, we need to find out what it is and stop it. Well, me and Sam will start with the police department. See if we can find anything, Dean said as he opened the door to the Impala. Well, take this area, Ellen said. Castile had been looking at the Reapers and felt the barest twinge a few blocks away. I'm going to find out why they're here, he said as he began walking. He paused as both Dean and Gabriel's graces brushed against him, warning him to be careful. He nodded and continued on his way. Best that leaves you, Ellen said, looking at Gabriel. Gabriel looked from the Impala to the 2 women and back. I'll keep these 2 safe, he said, jabbing his thumb toward Ellen and Joe. If anything happens, screw secrecy and call for help. Got it. Dean rolled his eyes, but nodded as he got into the car and started it. Be careful, Sam said before joining Dean. So where should we start? Joe asked, looking around. How about Gabriel turned and his eyes landed on a storefront. Oh. Porn store. Dibs. Some angel, Ellen muttered as she watched Gabriel happily saunter across the street. He would occasionally take a sidestep. She sighed as her daughter soon followed Gabriel's path. Castiel was about to give up and return to Dean when a flash of movement caught his eye. He looked up in time to see someone move away from a window. He narrowed his eyes and reached out with his senses, but felt nothing. He appeared in the room where he had seen the figure and frowned, his eyes darting back and forth. As he moved further through the building, he wondered if he should go back and get Gabriel or Dean. He brushed off the thought as he went deeper inside. It was probably just a demon, nothing he couldn't handle. Besides, they had already seen him, and if he were to take the time to get someone else, then they would have already escaped. He reached out his senses again and felt the barest hint of a demon. He followed the feeling and sighed when he reached a dead end. Bright light filled the room, and Castiel froze as he was trapped by a circle of holy fire. "Hello, brother." Castiel swallowed and slowly turned around. In front of him stood Lucifer. His thoughts were torn between regretting not getting help and being glad that only he had been caught. He was a nobody. At least, that was what he thought. But from the way Lucifer was looking at him, he felt like he was more important than he had originally thought. "So you must be Castiel," Lucifer said. He narrowed his eyes as he drew closer and looked over the younger angel. "You're different from the other young ones." Castiel shifted uncomfortably. He had caught glimpses of Gabriel's thoughts whenever the other angel would curiously poke at his grace. The more confused Gabriel became, the more irritated and confused Castiel grew as well. So told. "What are your intentions with Seraphiel?" Castiel blinked in surprise. "Seraphiel? I don't know what you're talking." "You've marked him," Lucifer said, cutting Castiel off. "I've seen it in Gabriel's grace. Do not lie to me, little brother. I could easily destroy you." "Could you?" Castiel countered. He stared hard at Lucifer's face, illuminated by the glow of the fire. "You don't look well." Lucifer smiled and nodded as he gestured to the welts on his face. "Yes, it's this vessel. Nick is a poor substitute. Sam Winchester would be the better option, and I hear that he is fairly close by." "He won't say yes," Castiel insisted. "Not to you. Not ever." "I beg to differ." Lucifer frowned and looked away. He gave Castiel a curious gaze. "Where is Seraphiel?" "As far from you as possible," Castiel ground out. "Loyalty, such a nice quality to see in this day and age," Lucifer said approvingly. Told you came here in an automobile." "Yes." Castiel carefully replied. "What was it like?" Lucifer asked. Castiel looked around, wondering what Lucifer was planning to do with him. It didn't seem like the other angel was out to kill him or even punish him for winning Seraphiel's affections. On the contrary, Lucifer was being quite civil. Not what he had been expecting at all. Slow. Confining," he eventually replied. "I see. Oh. It would seem that Seraphiel is here, after all. And looking for you," Lucifer said as he looked around. "Good. That should keep him busy for a while." Castiel tilted his head curiously at the tone in Lucifer's voice. There was regret and guilt, almost apologetic. He licked his lips before speaking. "Whatever you're about to do, stop. It doesn't have to be this way, Lucifer. Seraphiel believes in you. Don't prove him wrong." Lucifer shook his head sadly and looked away. "It's already too late," he quietly replied before leaving Castiel alone in the darkened room. Gabriel's head shot up and he dropped the DVD he had been looking at. "Shit," he whispered. He quickly left the porn shop and looked up and down the empty street before flying to where Ellen and Joe were. "We got a problem," he said, landing behind them. "They don't have the latest installment of Casa Erotica," Ellen said sarcastically. "Well, that too. But, no. I think Kaz got caught," he replied. Joe tightened her grip on her shotgun and moved to stand beside her mother. "What you mean? How can you tell?" Gabriel shook his head as he cast out his senses. Right now, Hess the only angel around not hiding his grace. He was there 1 second, gone the next. "Do you think Hess dead?" Joe asked in alarm. Gabriel shook his head distractedly. "No, when an angel dies, there's shockwaves. We're close enough that I would have felt it," he explained. "Then we should go help him," Ellen said, pushing past Gabriel. She pushed on the door, but it didn't budge. "What, hey? Unlock this." "Lem make one thing clear, Kaz can take care of himself," Gabriel said. "I'm more worried about Siri. Hess already low on juice and we have Lucifer running around town somewhere. Ain't exactly a good mix, you know." Ellen sighed and nodded. "So we check on Dean first." "Good plan." Gabriel placed his hands on Ellen and Joe's shoulders. Joe breathed in sharply as the small store they were in vanished and was replaced with the inside of a police station. She saw Sam and Dean looking at one of the computers in the back of the room. "Sam. Dean." Sam and Dean looked up in surprise, and Dean sharply jabbed Gabriel with his grace. "What's going on?" Dean asked. "Oz is trapped," Gabriel replied, narrowing his eyes as Dean's wings spread out. "Hess not hurt. I can tell that much." "Damn it," Dean shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. Shoulder to let him go off on his own. "You think it was Lucifer?" Sam asked. "Who else?" Dean bit out. "We gotta find cause." "Sure thing, Sir Raphael," Gabriel cut in, "but could you maybe, oh, I dunno, quit giving away our position." Dean growled as he pushed off the desk. "I'm not giving away anything," he shouted back. He sent out one last blast from his grace, trying to catch a trace of Castiel, but to no avail. "Nothing that anyone can lock onto." "Maybe not, but now Lucifer knows you're here, right?" Sam said. "We should still move on. Just in case," Ellen added. Dean nodded and huffed as he sent out a threat to Lucifer. He received a quick reply, promising that Castiel was safe. Unhappy, but safe. He glanced at Gabriel and shook his head. "What'd you think?" "Well, Hess not a liar. Cause can hold for a while," Gabriel replied. Right, Dean sighed as he tucked his wings away. "So let's take care of the demon outside, huh?" Gabriel said with a smile. "Maybe they'll know where Cause is." "Here's a demon outside?" Sam asked, looking to Dean for an answer. "And a couple hellhounds." "Nothing to worry about," Dean replied with a shrug. He picked up his gun and headed to the door. "Don't play with them, Siri," Gabriel warned. "We have bigger fish to fry." Dean bristled as Gabriel's grace rubbed along his own. He paused with his hand on the door, ready to push. He looked back at the other four and sighed. Gabriel was the only one not wearing a worried expression. "Fine, we'll go out the back." "Wait, how long have they been out there?" Gabriel asked as he moved to stand next to Dean. "Right after me and Sam got here." "Sounds like a messenger with a pair of guards, in that case." Dean looked from Gabriel to Sam. "Messenger as in Meg?" Sam shrugged as he frowned. "If it is, then why didn't she just come right in?" "Orders? Playing it safe." "The demon you made that deal with," Ellen said disapprovingly. "It's a good deal," Dean insisted. "Look, this seems legit. Messenger with guards. They get in, deliver the message, and get out. Only they're not packing the power to talk to a pair of angels and guarantee a survivor," Gabriel pointed out. "Lucifer doesn't know yet." "I still don't like it," Ellen said. A small group descended the steps of the police station and found Meg standing in the middle of the street. She had a cocky smirk and it almost slipped the moment Dean's wings came out and the hellhound she had brought cowered behind her. "Hey, Dean, she said casually, standing her ground. "What's he want?" Dean growled as he stalked up to her. "You're supposed to come with me, just you and Sam," she said, looking past Dean to the rest of the group. She lowered her voice before she continued. "I can only guarantee their safety if you agree. And that's only from the hounds. And if I don't agree? Then I'm supposed to drag you back kicking and screaming," she replied, nodding to the hellhounds. "Doesn't look like they're really up to it," Dean said as one of the hounds whimpered. "Well, this wasn't part of the plan," Meg grudgingly admitted. "And I'm not allowed to say anything about it. Kinda stuck here, Dean. Gimme something to work with. Please. With the position you've so graciously forced upon me, I've seen a different side of Lucifer than the others. I've seen how he looks at demons. He made us, but we're worse than humans to him. I'm not gonna make it out of this alive if you don't help me out." "And why should I help you?" "Do you know where your boyfriend is?" she said. Dean stared at Meg before reaching out to Gabriel for an opinion. He looked over as Gabriel came up beside him, followed closely by the others. Well, it all depends," Gabriel replied. "Just where is she gonna take you to?" Meg looked uncertainly at Gabriel. "I'm not permitted to say." "Who are you, anyway?" "I'm Gabriel," he said, flashing his wings. "And you can tell Lucy that I'm keeping an eye on these losers for my own selfish benefit." He took Dean by the elbow and led him a few feet away from the stunned demon. "She might be taking you to Lucifer," he whispered. "Or out of town. Then you just come straight back. Either way, it's probably our best option without giving ourselves away," Gabriel said. "He'll keep track of you, and once we get Cause out, we'll be up an angel." Dean nodded, still not happy about the decision. "Then let's hope for the best. Here. I know you have the gun, but just in case, no," Gabriel said quietly as he held out an angel blade to Dean. Dean's breath caught and he swallowed as he shakily reached for the blade. "Hey, are you sure?" "You haven't earned it yet," Gabriel admitted. "But we need every edge we can get. I'm loaning it to you. I expect it back after this fiasco." "Got it." Dean's fingers wrapped around the handle of his blade and he sighed at the familiar feel of it. He could feel the talons of his true form being filled with the blade's power. He wasn't sure if it was his imagination, but he could have sworn that he could feel traces of heaven lingering on the blade. "It's been so long," he whispered. He startled as Sam's hand touched his shoulder and he looked at his brother. "So, what's the plan?" Sam asked, looking from Dean to the blade. Dean spun his blade in thought. "Stick to the plan," he replied. "We give him a chance." "How many chances are we talking here?" Joe asked. "You'd bend over backwards for your family. So how far's too far when it comes to family?" Gabriel and Dean shared a look as they brushed Grace's. Gabriel shrugged and rubbed his neck. "Well, we definitely won't let him get anywhere near our personal death tolls. How's that sound?" Ellen narrowed her eyes at the Archangel. "Do you really think we should be giving him that much leeway?" Sam watched as both Dean and Gabriel seemed to deflate. "Look, let's just get this done. You guys get cause and we'll go with Meg." "Just right," Dean said quietly. "Me and Gabe already talked about it. He'll get his chance. He refuses to shoot him. And if that doesn't work, I gave Siri back his blade," Gabriel quietly added. "That'll take out an angel, no problem." "Just a matter of getting close enough," Dean said. "Which shouldn't be too hard once he knows who I am." He brushed off Gabriel's warning to use that tactic only as a last resort. Right, Ellen nodded uncertainly before glancing at Meg. The demon had an anxious look on her face. "You better hurry up. He'll find a way to check in with Bobby. See if Hess found anything on what's going on." Meg was having a hard time with her contract and Dean was not helping. She had brought them to a bank and led them to the vault. She opened it and stood off to the side. Dean looked incredulously from the vault to Meg. "Seriously?" "Just doing my job," she replied. "I'm supposed to keep Sam safe and Dean alive. What's safer than a safe?" "Helps that it keeps us out of the way, right?" Sam said. "Do you really expect us to just walk in there?" "I expect you to walk in, wait until I get the hell out of Dodge, and then break out," Meg replied. "And what's Lucifer expect?" Dean asked. "I don't know," she said honestly. "He had a message for after this was done. I can't give it to you yet. Beauty can't tell you what I've seen." "And what's that?" Dean asked, unable to hide the tightness in his voice. "In the chash cold that kept everyone in town. Slaughter every last human." The other demons were so high on the mayhem they didn't notice that Lucifer left this big opening. A lot of people got out. He almost didn't do it. "So what changed his mind?" Sam asked. "Seraphiel," she replied before directing her attention back to Dean. "Every bit of mercy Hess shown is all for you, Dean." Dean turned away and chewed his lip in thought. He wished Meg hadn't told him that. He was already having a hard time prepping himself for potentially killing Lucifer, and this new bit of insight was not going to make it any easier. He sighed heavily as he turned back to face Meg. "How long do you need to clear town?" he asked. "In an hour." "You have to report back," Sam said, sharing a look with Dean. "Just get in the vault," Meg said. "And don't follow me." Meg waited for the pair of brothers to enter the vault. She pushed on the door, pausing when it was still open just a crack. 1 hour, she reminded. Dean rolled his eyes and held up his wrist, showing off his watch. 1 hour. Exactly. Starts the moment you close that door. The door shut and the lock slid into place, echoing in the small chamber. "You do have the mojo to get us out of here, right?" Sam asked after a few minutes. "Yeah. It'll drain me a bit, but my recoup time's getting better," Dean replied. "Meg just slipped out of my range and she doesn't seem dumb enough to make a beeline straight to Lucifer. Maybe Cause or Bob'll have something. Or I can just blast my location. That'd probably get his attention." Sam leaned against the wall as he watched Dean. "Dean. Sam. I'm fine. I'll be fine. I can do this." Sam looked at Dean doubtfully. "You're gonna have to kill Lucifer. You're your ex-lover or brother or whatever it is you guys are. Doing that, even for their own good, isn't easy, Dean," he said quietly. "I'm not asking if you're fine or if you're gonna be fine. I just want you to know I'm here for you." Dean nodded as he leaned against the opposite wall and stared at the floor. "We don't know if we're gonna have to kill him," he replied. "He might back down. I mean, you heard Meg. This whole town cold have been massacred. But Hess still killing innocent people. Like him not just as guilty," Dean snapped. "May not killed an innocent with my own hands, but I'm sure as fuck responsible for a lot. All those wars I started. Hell, I put a guy on track to go to hell just cause he beat me at backgammon. You remember the nun orgy? Like it really ended well for them. One night of fun and they get flogged the next day. The girl I possessed. They tried her as a witch. I didn't care. I had my fun. I got what I wanted. So what makes me so special? What makes me forgivable but not Lucifer? Why do I get a second chance but not him?" Sam looked away. He was at a loss for words. He knew that Dean Seraphiel had not been a pleasant being. He had done his research, found every scrap of information he could on the angel. Knowing what little he did about Seraphiel's fall and knowing Dean, he had found that everything pointed to a very angry and scared child, lashing out at everything and everyone around him. As much as he wanted to keep the idea of Seraphiel separate from Dean, Sam could always spot the similarities. Dean always had the potential for being cruel, and he would be if anyone ever crossed him or threatened Sam. But he was also one of the kindest and most loving people he knew. If Seraphiel could change for the better, then was it possible for Lucifer to do the same? Seraphiel had to find his way on his own, but Lucifer had both Seraphiel and Gabriel ready and willing to do anything to save him. Sam looked to the side as he remembered something Dean had said a while back. Seraphiel had been made for Lucifer. Neither Dean nor Gabriel knew exactly what for, but Sam was beginning to have his own suspicions. He looked up at Dean, who was staring miserably at the floor. Then well, give him a proper chance, Sam said, causing Dean to look up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. He shook his head and laughed softly. Well, try to save the devil. Gabriel moved through the large building, heading straight to where Meg had said Castiel was being kept. The light of a bright fire flickered through a doorway, and Gabriel hurried along. He turned the corner and found Castiel standing in the middle of a circle of holy fire, glaring at the large pipe that dangled from the ceiling just on the other side of the wall of flames. Haas. You're okay. Castiel shifted his stare to Gabriel and nodded. Where is Dean? Safe. Either on his way to meet Lucifer or to be kept out of the way, Gabriel replied. He raised his hand and suppressed the flames, freeing Castiel from the circle. Either way, they're gonna meet up soon. Alone? Are you sure that's wise? Well, Sam's with him. Gabriel shrugged as he turned to leave. So, no. Not really wise, but it's about the best plan we have so far. Come on. Ellen and Joe are trying to get hold of Bobby. Castiel followed Gabriel in silence. He didn't want to chance leaving Dean alone with Lucifer for too long. He knew he could trust Dean, but he didn't know what Lucifer would do. They arrived outside and found Ellen and Joe waiting for them. Bobby thinks Lucifer's trying to summon death, Ellen said the moment she saw them. That would explain all the Reapers. Waiting for the big boss to show up, Gabriel said, looking around. Great. Any idea where he's gonna do it? Cemetery. Gabriel looked from Ellen to Castiel and sighed. Should we try to stop this ourselves or let Siri go through with it on his own? I'm not sure, Castiel reluctantly admitted. Lucifer, he didn't say anything directly, but he seemed to regret his actions. Well, the horsemen have always been waiting on the sidelines. They show up in order, but you can always call them in early with the right. Gabriel trailed off and widened his eyes in surprise. Wait. Regret in what way? In disappointing Dean, I believe. Not for risking his own safety. Castiel narrowed his eyes in confusion. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. The horsemen are the key to Lucifer's cage. Like, literally. Those dumb rings of theirs are the actual key. So why is he summoning death early? Joe asked. He wouldn't happen to be giving Dean an easy out for locking him up, would he? Ellen said with a grim look. I don't know. Dad ordered Michael to toss him in the cage after he started making demons. He had enough time to make a small army before Siri faced judgment and spit in Dad's face, Gabriel said. At least Luce gave orders to keep Siri out of hell. Who knows how fucked up he would have ended up if he'd have been welcomed. So why didn't Dean or Seraphiel get thrown in, too? Ellen asked. Dad didn't order it. I think everyone just assumed that it was because he didn't want to risk Lucifer escaping, Gabriel explained. But no, I'm not so sure what Dad was thinking. Dean leaned against a lamppost, catching his breath. Dean, I really think you should ask for help, Sam said as he waited. Dean shook his head and pushed himself off the post. I'm fine, he insisted. Just wasn't expecting the angel warding on the vault to give me problems. I can do this. Do you even know where you're going? Something big is going down over there, he replied, pointing straight ahead. And all the Reapers are watching. Sam nodded and followed Dean along the road. The sky grew darker as the sun set, and they were soon on the edge of an old cemetery with trees and remnants of the Civil War scattered around. They moved between the trees in silence. A short distance ahead, they could make out the shapes of several people standing in a group, facing the same direction. Before the group was a man, shoveling dirt into a hole. Dean grabbed Sam by the arm and quickly led him behind a large tree. That's Lucifer. With a shovel, he whispered. He shook as he hugged himself, resisting the urge to reach out for the other angel. Do you need me to do this? Sam asked. Dean shook his head and swallowed. No, just get his attention, so I can get in close. Sam stared at Dean for a long moment before slowly nodding. I'm trusting you, Dean, he said before moving out from behind the tree and through the small crowd to confront Lucifer from behind. He raised his shotgun and shouted. Hey. You wanted to see me? Lucifer slowly turned and dropped the shovel. Oh, Sam, you don't need that gun here, he said. You know it'd never hurt you. Not really. Yeah? "Well, it hurt you," a voice said from beside him. He turned his head to see Dean pointing a gun at him, aiming between his eyes. He raised a brow in question as he swept his grace over the newcomer. He narrowed his eyes as he retracted his grace. "Michael's vessel should you be pledging your undying allegiance to him?" he asked. He frowned as Dean lowered the gun, a flicker of worry passing over Dean's face. "Michael can suck it," Dean bit out. "I'm here to talk." His breath caught as Lucifer's wings slowly unfurled. They were still as beautiful and pristine as Dean remembered. 3 pairs of perfect wings, every feather shining against the night in the purest of whites. He swallowed as he kept his eyes locked onto Lucifer's, doing his best not to give himself away. He flinched as Lucifer raised a hand, and he pulled the trigger, sending a bullet straight into Lucifer's knee. Lucifer hissed in pain, but remained standing. He sneered hatefully as Dean dropped the gun. "That toy of yours can't kill me," he said as he drew his arm back. He punched Dean in the stomach, using a small bit of his power to send him flying a few feet back. Dean landed heavily on the ground, gasping for air. He quickly raised his head and stared at Lucifer with wide eyes. He hadn't meant to shoot Lucifer. Not yet. They were supposed to talk first. He could see Sam out of the corner of his eye and waved his hand for his brother to stay back. Shakily, he got to his feet. Lucifer tilted his head as he regarded Dean. "You're rather resilient," he said as he stepped forward. Dean cringed as Lucifer's grace swept over him curiously. He kept his own grace well hidden as he pushed his human traits forward, feeding Lucifer what he wanted. "Such a good little soldier," Lucifer spat, finding Dean's memories of John. "Fitting that you would be Michael's true vessel. Well, if he wants to play this as it was written, then he can put you back together. Piece by piece." Dean gasped in pain as Lucifer's power pressed down on him. He felt a bone break and whimpered as he clutched his arm. He could ignore the pain his body felt, but not the hatred emanating from Lucifer. He clenched his eyes shut as a tear fell down his cheek. This was not how it was supposed to go. "Stop it," he begged in a broken whisper. Lucifer let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Why? So that you can attempt and fail to kill me? Do you even know just what you're involved in? What part you must play? There is no stopping it. Even if I were to kill you, you would be brought back," he said bitterly. "So why should I not take you out of the equation until Michael deems it necessary to bring you back?" Dean looked up as he felt a small wave of helplessness flow through Lucifer's grace. Another loud snap of a bone. "That's not what I meant," he replied. "God knows I deserve this and worse. I failed you. I love you, but I didn't love you enough to do the right thing. I failed us both." Lucifer took a quick step back, staring down at Dean warily. His grace drifted over the cringing human, looking closer. "Please, Lucifer," Dean said quietly, doing everything in his power to keep up his human facade. "Please stop it. Stop hurting people. Stop following this plan. It doesn't have to be this way." "This is a trick," Lucifer whispered before sending another strong blast at Dean. Dean cried out as he lost control over his wings and grace. He wrapped his wings protectively around himself as he fell to his knees. Lucifer's eyes widened in shock as the false human soul was replaced by a familiar grace. "Seraphiel, but that's how." He hurried to Dean and knelt in front of him, slowly reaching out to touch a red wing. "Who did this to you?" he demanded in a harsh whisper. Dean flinched away, refusing to look at Lucifer. He felt the wings of another wrap around him and he pulled his own tighter about himself. Love and apologies radiated from Lucifer as the angel healed Dean's bones and numbed the pain. "I'm so sorry, Seraphiel. I never meant to harm you. Never you." "Please stop," Dean said as he lifted his head and met Lucifer's eyes. "It's not too late." Lucifer looked over his shoulder to the hole he had been filling. "Yes, it is. Did you kill the townspeople?" "I gave the order," Lucifer admitted, looking down. "All for the ritual to summon death, so yes, I am responsible. It's strange how no one has shown up to stop me. I'm here to stop you. A bit late, I'm afraid. It's no use. There is no changing it. I'll simply play my part. Be the devil they all know me to be. It doesn't have to be this way. Prove them wrong. If I can change, then so can you," Dean insisted. "And I've done so much worse than you." Lucifer looked back at Dean. You could never do worse than me. I headed the rebellion. I slaughtered so many of our own. All you did was follow." Dean looked away as his guilt kicked up. "I am responsible for so much death and destruction. More than just our own kin in heaven. The blood on your hands is nothing compared to the blood on mine. You've been locked up. You've been kept away me. I've been busy," he said with a broken laugh. Lucifer lightly stroked Dean's grace, searching for answers. What he found worried him. Memories of Seraphiel's time on Earth flooded him. His sweet, loving brother had lashed out against their father the only way he knew that could possibly hurt him. He had gone after the humans. So many deaths and ruined lives. So many more casualties than what heaven had suffered. "And Father never punished you?" he asked. He would have thought that God would have struck Seraphiel down at the first human death. Dean shook his head as he tentatively touched Lucifer's grace. Being ignored is a greater punishment than you could ever imagine, he said. I had no one. Any angel that was on earth avoided me. And then they all left. Lucifer slowly let Seraphiel into his grace, holding back a surprised gasp. He hadn't had a proper chance to look through Seraphiel's grace when he was first released, and he wished he had known just how damaged the other angel was. Had he known, he would have dropped everything. His vengeance on God in heaven be damned. His sweet beautiful Seraphiel had been damaged beyond repair, and Lucifer only had himself to blame. The bright clear grace he had known and loved was so dark and corrupted now, deep scars left by sin and hell's taint. Bitter and alone, but still full of so much love and devotion for those who earned it. He could feel Dean's love for his human brother, and he glanced over to where Sam stood, cautiously watching the pair, but giving them space. I had to find love and family elsewhere, Dean said, following Lucifer's gaze. He licked his lips before carefully choosing his words. With humans. They're capable of so much more than we ever thought. Of so much goodness and love. There's a few bad apples, but it's worth it to find the good ones. He swallowed as he touched Lucifer's cheek, gaining his full attention. If I had to necessarily choose, I think I'd pick earth over heaven. Lucifer stared at Dean in shock. Through their entwined graces, he felt no deceit. He could also feel his old mark on Seraphiel's grace, and frowned as he found Castiel's right next to it. He didn't bother to hide his confusion as his grace curiously poked at his mark and Castiel's. Dean looked down, blushing lightly. He didn't want to replace it, he explained. He loves all of me. The good, the bad, and the ugly. No matter what, no matter the taint, you will never be ugly, Seraphiel, Lucifer said, cupping Dean's cheek. Dean chuckled as he met Lucifer's eyes. It's a movie reference. I'm sure Gabriel would be more than happy to subject you to humanity's more colorful side. He has been persistent in trying to speak with me, Lucifer said with a quiet smile. He had left so suddenly before the rebellion. He never said why. I was so alone, and he believe I may have smothered you in an attempt to ease my own pain. Dean licked his lips as he watched Lucifer stand. Shouldn't push it, but Luce, I gotta know, are you gonna stop? Seraphiel, I can't just stop this, Lucifer said quietly. He stared down at Dean with sorrowful eyes. Everything is already in motion. If I were to call it all off, the demons would wonder what the fuck was going on and lash out, Dean finished. The horsemen, too. At least with Deethy will be a little more controllable. It's out of your control, Dean said quietly as he stood. We're fucked no matter what. Lucifer frowned, catching Dean's meaning by his tone. Yes, I can try to keep things a little more contained on my end, but there are so many demons. More than I was expecting. I knew humans had the capacity, but this is unexpected. Dean coughed self-consciously. Yeah, I may have had something to do with that. Lucifer looked at Dean sadly. He had never meant for Seraphiel to fall so far. He had tried to protect the other angel by pushing him away, but it had all been for naught. I'll do what I can, he promised as he turned away. His wings spread on reflex as he faced Castiel, and he narrowed his eyes at the angel who had been standing just behind him. Castiel. I see you managed to get out. Castiel's eyes flicked from Lucifer to Dean and back. He held his blade in his hand, ready to attack. Yes. I was lucky, he carefully replied. Gabriel let you out, Lucifer said knowingly. Give him my well. I'll tell him, Dean said quietly, placing his hand on Lucifer's shoulder. Lucifer nodded and moved past Castiel. He ran his grace along the younger angels, sending threats and promises of what he would do if Castiel were to ever hurt Seraphiel. You'd better leave. The ritual is done. Everything else is just formality, but if it's not performed, then death will be offended, he said quietly. Can't have that, Dean mumbled sarcastically. Lucifer faced Dean with a sigh. No. We can't. The horsemen may be under my control, but it's a fragile hold. All I can do is point them in a direction and hope for the best. In all honesty, I don't care what casualties arise, but for you and Gabriel, I will do my best to limit it. Or you could tell us where they're gonna be, and we can take them out, Dean said with a half-hearted grin. I can only let so much slip. If you were to begin successfully thwarting me at every turn, heaven would take notice and descend on you, Lucifer said, looking to the group of transfixed demons. I'm already risking everything by speaking with you. As much as I hate our current means of communicationing the demon, Meg is still our best option. I have no doubt that Michael will soon know your whereabouts. You can't hide forever. Dean nodded as Castiel and Sam came to stand beside him. And Seraphiel, although I am not opposed to seeing this play out differently than how it was written, I do not believe Michael will be as willing, Lucifer warned. He follows orders blindly. No amount of reasoning will sway him. Yeah. I know. And without Dad to tug on the leash, it's gonna be a shit ton of fun. Dean reluctantly pulled his grace away from Lucifer's. He was grateful when Castiel's grace immediately wrapped around him. Well, will I see you again? If our paths naturally cross, yes. For now, play this as it was meant to be, Lucifer replied. Do not let Michael catch on. He will strike fast and hard when he finds out. I'm sure any humans caught in the crossfire will go to heaven for their trouble, and to him that's all that matters. Free pass isn't much consolation if you don't get to make your own choices and live your life, Dean replied. Think a lot of humans would feel cheated by that. Lucifer paused as he reached down to retrieve the shovel. I see. Is that what you're doing now, Seraphiel? Living a borrowed human life? Your life? Dean swallowed and nodded. As best I can, he replied. I think all angels should give it a try. To just experience the world. See what it is Dad wanted us to protect. Lucifer nodded silently as he resumed filling the hole with dirt. You'd better go, he said as he finished. But. He looked over his shoulder in time to see Castiel place his hands on Sam and Dean's shoulders before the three vanished. A moment later, Seraphiel's voice filled Angel Radio with worry, begging Lucifer to be careful. He looked at the demons still in their trance. He closed his connection and focused his attention. He had a ritual to finish and a horseman to convince. You've gotta be shitting me, Bobby stared in disbelief at the small group of hunters and angels gathered in his study. Everyone was alive and well, he had hoped for the outcome, but he certainly hadn't expected it. And then for Dean to declare that Lucifer was somewhat of an ally, there had to be a catch. Dean shrugged loosely and looked away. He has gonna do as much damage control as he can. Why? Bobby stressed. Has got no reason to help us. He feels guilty, Gabriel replied. Kinda his fault Sarah's so fucked up. He rolled his eyes as Dean threw him a glare. Oh, come on. Luce isn't anywhere near as corrupted as you. Then let me do you a favor, Dean said, and immediately cut himself off from Gabriel and Castiel's graces, crossing his arms. Castiel sighed and moved to stand beside Dean. He lightly touched Dean's arm since his grace was being ignored. Gabriel threw his arms up in frustration. But it's the truth. I'm not saying it to be mean, he insisted. You really think I came out of playing a pagan god unscathed? Dean rounded on Gabriel, raising his wings and ignoring how Gabriel's eyes lingered along the tips. Sinners don't stack up the same as innocents and you know it, he hissed. Maybe not, but human sacrifice in your name has its own brand of fucked up and you know it, Gabriel shot back. I wasn't just a trickster, I was Loki. I had a good gig going. I had friends. And now? I'm stuck with you lot, fighting a war one want nothing to do with. So leave. No one's asking you to stay. No. I said I ain't running this time, so I'm sticking here. You lucky jerks are stuck with me. Dean gave his wings a sharp flap and Gabriel raised his own. If we weren't so desperate for help. I know. It'd be out on my rear. Keep telling yourself that. A soft ringtone broke the tension that had settled and Dean growled in annoyance as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone and grimaced at the number. It's Meg. He glanced up and sighed at the various disapproving looks he received. His wings sagged as he looked back at the small screen, still telling himself it was a good deal. He felt Castiel and Gabriel attempting to stroke his grace and he answered the call, reluctantly letting them in. Meg. To what do I owe the pleasure? He said, feigning confidence. Message, Meg replied uncertainly. A hint, I guess. Dean frowned and glanced at Sam as he switched to speakerphone. What sorta hint? The kind about whores and prophets. Tuck's getting laid. Good for him. Who? What? No. Look, you wanna go save this town or what? What town? Dean asked with a sigh. Starting to think turning down Gabriel's help was a bad idea, Sam said as he looked over his shoulder. Drive faster, Dean. I can't. Or do you want me to get out and push? Dean snapped. If you think it'd help. Sam looked at Dean, his eyes running over his brother's shoulders. Why didn't you just flash your wings or something? Dean shook his head and frowned as they quickly approached a burning blockade. Because something else is here and I don't want to tip it off just yet, he said. Windows. Sam and Dean both leaned toward the middle of the vehicle as the windows were smashed in and hands reached for them. Water then sprayed over the grasping demons, calling their attention away from the brothers. Holy water, Dean said lowly. And a handful of humans. The pair watched as one of the men spoke into a megaphone, quickly sending the demons fleeing from their vessels in smoky masses. That's useful, Sam said. He glanced at Dean and caught the small smirk on his brother's lips. What's so funny? Modern Enochian, Dean mumbled in reply. I think we found what Luce was hinting at, cause I don't think goat mouthfucker would exercise anything. That, and those demons were cackling up a storm as they left. You two alright? The man with the megaphone asked as he came up to them. Peachy, Dean replied, doing another sweep with his senses, but coming up empty. He could still feel the larger evil on the edge of his senses, but no demons. Be careful, the man continued. It's dangerous around here. Dean stared at him for a moment, wondering if he should call out to Gabriel for extra help. Nothing seemed right. Demons weren't known for giving out fake magical phrases, then playing along with them. He needed to find out what was going on. As he spoke to the man, he found out that Rob was part of what had been dubbed the Sacrament Lutheran Militia and that their town had been hit so hard by demons that everyone living there was in the know. It was to the point that a small wedding saw all the guests carrying weapons, making it a surreal experience for Sam and Dean. Watching as children pitched in to help with the fight had reminded Dean of the old days when demons were rampant and entire villages worked together against the threat. It made him wonder what sort of old-school demon had taken up camp within the small town. He felt a pang of nostalgia, but quickly stamped it down, reminding himself of the loneliness he had endured. It was also a bitter reminder that he had been the cause of such reactions within villages long ago. It was as they were speaking with Pastor David Gideon that Dean felt the presence he had been sensing draw closer. He quickly pushed his human aspects forward just before he felt the soft, inquisitive caresses of the other presence. He forced himself not to face where it was coming from, doing everything to focus on the pastor's words instead. If he could just out the demon without giving himself away, but the pastor kept brushing him off. "Dad, it's okay," a young woman said as she approached. "Lee." Dean watched the exchange between father and daughter, wondering if he could do a sweep over the poor girl with his grace to see if there was anything of her left in there. If they were lucky, there was nothing left. No one came away from a possession that dark and remained okay. "It's Sam and Dean Winchester," Lee said, smiling reassuringly. "They're safe. I know all about them." "You do?" Dean said, narrowing his eyes. Had Lucifer set him up? Had everything been a lie? "Sure. From the angels," she replied. He rolled his eyes. The angels. Awesome. He tried to recall everything he knew about the apocalypse, trying to figure out what was going on. "Don't worry. They can't see you here," Lee said reassuringly. "The marks on your ribs, right? So you know all about us because angels told you?" Sam asked. He glanced at Dean and caught the distracted look. "Yes. Among other things." "Like the snappy little exorcism spell," Dean prompted. She nodded. "And they show me where the demons are going to be before it happens. How to fight back," she replied, her smile still friendly and inviting. "Never been wrong," David said proudly. "Not once. She's very special." Dean itched under the demon's constant attention. He almost reflexively released his hold of his grace as he remembered what Meg had said. Whores and prophets. He knew what they were dealing with. "And let me guess, before you see something, you get a really bad migraine. You see flashing lights." "How'd you know?" Lee asked in wonder. Dean resisted scoffing. He knew for a fact that each prophet had a different reaction. The one he described just happened to be one of the more common ones. "You're not the first prophet we've met," he said carefully. He wasn't sure how much information she had about what she was imitating. Later that night, Sam and Dean were sitting at the bar of a tavern. Sam had already left a message for Gabriel and tried to leave one for Castiel. He hung up with a heavy sigh and looked at Dean, shrugging. "No luck, huh?" Dean sighed and took a drink from his beer. He sent a quick message across Angel Radio to Gabriel, berating him for ignoring his phone. "Nothing good on the radio. Just a running ad for some movie," he said carefully, glancing around. "Great. Any theories for what's going on?" Sam asked. He frowned at the small nod Dean gave him, quickly followed by a shake of the head. "Not a clue. Demons want to gank the girl. Take the prophet out of the picture. So angels are sending these people out to do their dirty work. I mean, I know angels are lazy, brutally." Dean gave Sam a tired look for the slight jab. "All signs point to yes," he replied snarkily. So, they're gonna get ripped to shreds," Sam replied. He looked around the bar at the people drinking and shook his head. "I don't get it," he whispered. "We're all gonna die, Sam," Dean said as he looked around. "In, like, a month, maybe two. And they all know it. This is the end of the world, but these people aren't freaking out. In fact, they're running to the exit in an orderly fashion." He raised his brow expectantly at Sam. "Who says they're all gonna die?" Sam shot back. "Whatever happened to us saving them?" The church bell rang, and Sam and Dean watched as the bar cleared out. They learned that Lee had supposedly had a vision of a demon attack, and Dean had to resist openly scoffing. Even if there was going to be a demon attack, this was not how demons operated. They tagged along the next day, and Dean was finally able to disclose what he knew to Sam in the car. "The whore," Sam repeated with a half laugh. "Hey, I didn't pick the name. I think pretender or false prophet would be better, but it just doesn't have the same impact or something as the whore of Babylon," Dean replied. "Never met her, so I'm not sure what her mo is. She is a mind reader, though, so I'm stretched a little thin trying to keep her out of your head and feed her BS from my own." Sam nodded in understanding. So you think Shess giving the community a false sense of security, then take them all out? Dean's brows furrowed as he thought about Sam's suggestion. He slowly nodded as he pulled his car up beside the others. I guess that makes sense. Make them think they have the upper hand, then laugh in their faces as they beg for their lives. So we stop her before it gets that far, Sam said, ignoring what Dean was implying about himself. How do we kill her? First, we need a stake made from the wood of a cypress tree in Babylon. Then we need a servant of heaven. So we get the stick, then you gank her. Dean shook his head sadly. Not a servant of heaven, Sammy. Haven't been for a real long time. Cause might work, but even that hell, even Gabe won't work. Once you fool once you're even a little corrupted. He sighed heavily and opened his door, plastering a shit-eating grin on his face. Part of Dean wanted to flash his wings and power at the demons as they cleared out the house, but that would give the game away and force Lee to flee. So he played along, even letting Dylan, a teenager that had joined on the hunt, look like he had saved his ass a couple times. When Sam had raised a brow at him, he replied back, confidence never hurt no one. When they finished up with the demons, Sam, Dean, and Dylan gathered next to the Impala. Sam rolled his eyes as Dean went from stroking the kid's ego to offering him a beer on the condition that the kid's mother didn't find out. Believe me. I will not, Dylan promised as he opened the beer tossed to him and turned to lean his back against the car. He heard a swift scrape from beneath the car and turned just in time to see Dean straightening, bloody knife in hand. What? We missed one, Dean easily replied. Lucky her foot was sticking out, otherwise, ya'd be demon food. Dylan laughed nervously and glanced around. Think we missed any more? Dean shook his head. Nah. And if there are, they've cleared out. Don't wanna mess with 3 top-notch hunters, right? He said, winking. He picked up the beer he had set on the car roof and tipped it to Dylan. Dylan let out a shaky breath and nodded, sipping at his own beer. Sam and Dean walked into the church, Dylan following closely behind. The kid ran right up to his mother, pulling her into a tight hug. Dylan. She brought her arms up and lightly hugged him back, smiling in bewilderment. What's wrong? Jane so SD Dylan, Lee stuttered as she approached the group. You're alive. Jane turned around, giving Lee a worried stare. Alive? What do you mean, alive? Lee's features quickly shifted into a warm, apologetic smile. The angels contacted me after everyone had left. They said that even more demons would be there. They said there might be casualties, she said. I was so worried when I found out that Dylan was coming back with Sam and Dean. I'm so glad they were there to protect him. Jane sighed in relief and kissed the side of Dylan's head, hugging him tightly. I could have lost you. She whispered. She pulled away and smiled tearily at Sam and Dean. Thank you. Thank you so much. All in a day's work, Dean replied. Demons, renegade angels, monsters, we can handle it. He moved his gaze to Lee and did his best not to give her a cocky grin. Your angels aren't exactly on top of it. They warn me as best they can, Lee said. With the apocalypse going on, things are bound to get a little confusing on all sides, and with a small gasp, she fell to the ground, convulsing. Dean didn't bother to hide rolling his eyes as he turned away. A vision. Oh, boy. He gave Sam an annoyed look and wished he could run off right then and there to get the stake they would need. David knelt by his daughter and helped her to stand when the seizure had passed. I'm fine. Thank you, she said softly, facing the small crowd of people gathered in the church. The angels have spoken to me. They helped with Dylan. Guided Sam and Dean to ensure his safety. Dean nodded to the side, mentally acknowledging that he was an angel and he had guided himself. If only Lee had known how close to the mark her vision was. It was a reward. For all our good work so far, Lee continued. We are chosen. Come Judgment Day, we will be reunited with our loved ones. Just as Dylan and his family have been reunited this very day. Dean closed his eyes, understanding the original spin that Lee was going to use if Dylan had died. He opened them and saw that Sam wore a similar expression. The angels have chosen us and we will be given paradise on earth. Lee paused as she looked around at the faces staring at her in hopeful adoration. All we have to do is follow the angels' commandments. But if they're not followed, her gaze shifted to Dylan and she shook her head sadly. They'll take back their gift. As Sam and Dean left the church, Sam ticked off some of the commandments Lee had given. No drinking, no gambling, no premarital sex. Dean, they basically just outlawed 90% of your personality, he said with a laugh. Dean nodded and smirked at Sam. Well, when in Rome. Really? You're agreeing with this? Dean shrugged and looked around. He could feel Lee's presence keeping an eye on him and Sam. He glanced at Sam and rolled his eyes. His mouth snapped shut as someone passed by and he watched them. People here might not need us. They seem good. Taken care of, he said slowly, keeping an eye on the people around them. I guess we should head on out, but our car battery died. I'm gonna go see if anyone can jumpstart her. Sam nodded as he watched Dean walk off. Dean found Lee easily enough. All he had to do was follow the dark tendrils of her power. He could feel them following both him and Sam, keeping tabs on their movements within the town. If they knew what her endgame was, then they could at least cut her off while they came up with someone to kill her. If he could get her to make her move, things would go a lot more quickly. Maybe if she didn't see him as a threat. As he spoke to her, he played up his insecurities. He went on about how he figured he wouldn't make it to paradise, making a comment about being cursed rather than chosen. It was as he was leaving that he knew he had her hooked. Must be hard. Being the vessel of heaven and having no hope, she said. Dean supposed it was meant to be pitying, but he could catch the gloating undertones. He stared at her for a moment and pushed a little more misery into his constructed soul. He felt her let up from watching him to focus more on Sam. As he left the room, he let his own power discreetly follow hers, locating Sam at the tavern. He smiled, knowing that it would help tip her toward making her move sooner. Dylan's survival, Dean's lack of faith, and Sam's acceptance of deviancy would be just enough. At night, Dean waited for Sam to arrive back at their motel room. He glanced up, giving a knowing smirk. "Where you been?" "Drinkin'," Sam replied as he removed his coat. Dean laughed softly as he nodded. "You rebel." "Bold ahead morbid, it was curfew," Sam said in annoyance. "You hear they shut down the cell towers?" Dean tilted his head in interest. "News to me. Anything else?" "No cable. Internet. Total cutoff from the corruption of the outside world," Sam replied. "They're turning this place into some sort of fundamentalist compound." Dean nodded as he sucked his lower lip and thought. Lee had been busy since had left. What's next? Stoning. Poisoned Kool-Aid. These so-called angels are toying with these people. And they're just going along with it. "Angel world, angel rules, man," Dean said softly. "Some folk need to be told what to do. There's a reason for the shepherd and flock comparison." He looked off to the distance suddenly, causing Sam to tense up. "What's going on?" She making her move. "Think so, huh? And there's an angel headed this way cause is almost here." "Hear anything back from Gabriel?" "You're not gonna believe this, but he managed to get Lucifer to see a movie with him. A comedy." Sam snorted in disbelief. "Willingly? So he wants to lose Lucifer's help." Dean smirked and shook his head. "I had a running commentary for about 2 hours of Luce and Gabe going back and forth about slapstick. So I'm gonna let Gabe slide on not helping out. That, and Hess gotta let on pestilence." He stood from the bed and moved to the door. "When Kaz gets here, tell him to get us that steak. Hess taking his time for whatever reason. It'll make sure Lee doesn't cause too much damage," he said as he left the motel room. Sam sighed as the door shut. It was around 10 minutes later that he heard the refrigerator door open. He turned to find Castiel staring inside it, frowning. "I got your message," Castiel slurred. "It was long, your message. And I find the sound of your voice grating. Next time, have Dean leave it. At least then there will be some consolation." Sam frowned as Castiel shut the fridge. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, watching the angel sway back and forth. "Are you drink?" In any other situation, he would have found it amusing, but right now. "No," Castiel flatly denied before slumping forward against the wall dividing the main room from the kitchenette. "Yes," he reluctantly admitted. "What the hell happened to you?" Sam asked, hoping that Castiel wasn't drunk on demon energies like Dean had been. "I found a liquor store." And I drank it," Castiel snapped back in annoyance. "Would you call me?" "We need you to get us a steak made from Babylonian cypress," Sam replied. He reached out as Castiel stumbled forward. "Whoa. Easy. You gonna be okay?" Castiel stared at Sam before motioning him closer. He leaned in and spoke into Sam's ear. "Don't ask stupid questions." He moved back and swayed slightly. "Babylonian cypress. As in the Whore of Babylon." Sam nodded uncertainly. "Wo's gonna kill her?" "'Cause I can't," Castiel said, raising and lowering his arms uselessly. "I lost that ability. First, when I helped Dean get to you, then when I chased Zachariah off. Probably even before that I think I started falling when I decided to keep Dean's secret so Raphael can't. Gabriel's been tainted by pagan sacrifice. And you well, you're an abomination." Sam thinned his lips and breathed in slowly. "What about a pastor? Gideon's pretty strong with his faith." Castiel tilted his head from side to side, thinking about it. "I suppose that could work." "Great. So you gonna get the steak?" Sam blinked in surprise as Castiel vanished. "You really were made for him, huh?" Dean was about to go after Lee, but paused when he heard shouting and the sound of glass breaking. He arrived just in time to see an angry mob tearing up the tavern with Pastor Gideon, trying to keep the peace. He recognized Dylan's mother as one of the more desperate members of the mob. He ran up to David and lightly touched his shoulder, gaining his attention. "What's going on, Padre?" David turned to Dean with a helpless expression. "Paulie says Paul has to leave since he." Dean narrowed his eyes and watched the fight unfold. Out of everyone involved, it seemed like Paul was the most level-headed of the bunch. When it looked like Rob and Paul were about to exchange blows, he pulled Rob away. "Hey, whoa. You don't want to do this," he said, positioning himself between them. The shot rang out and Dean spun to see Jane pointing a gun at where Paul had fallen. "No one's gonna take my son from me," she said shakily. Dean watched numbly as David began ushering people out, the mob's thirst for blood having been filled. He looked over as David touched his arm and he shook his head. It'll be along in a sec." David nodded and left Dean alone in the tavern with Paul's body. Dean cast out his senses to ensure that he was alone, then quickly knelt beside Paul. He placed his hand on Paul's chest and hoped he had enough juice to heal the man. His hand grew warm and a soft white light emitted from beneath it. He licked his lips as he pushed more power into it. On the edge of his senses, he could feel something calling to him, asking to lend its help. He couldn't feel any darkness from it, so he took a chance. He breathed in deeply and closed his eyes, accepting the offer. He grabbed his hand back as Paul spasmed and gasped. "Whoa. It's okay," Dean said, pushing him back to lean against the bar. "They're gone. You're safe." Paul stared at Dean with wide eyes and looked down at his bloody chest. I was shot. Jane shot me," he broke off in a choked sob. "Yeah, sorry about that. Was hoping to stop that from happening," Dean said. He could feel the helpful power lapping against him, filling his grace with love and power. His eyes widened and he quickly shut off his connection in a panic. He was not in any state to deal with what could potentially be heaven. "They just turned on me. All 'cause some stupid angels told them to." Paul frowned at the blood on his hand. He clawed at his shirt, moving it out of the way. His chest was covered in blood, but there were no wounds. No bullet holes. "What? How?" He looked up at Dean, who was giving him a small grimace. "I was more focused on the healing, not cleanup," Dean said. "Healing? You? What are you?" "That's a loaded question," Dean said, laughing nervously. "Tell you what. I'll explain once we get you somewhere safe." Somewhere. Paul blinked as the tavern vanished and he found himself in a motel room. Safe. Sam stood from his place on the couch and gave Dean an incredulous glare. "Dean. What are you doing?" "Panicking," Dean replied, giving Paul a gentle shove toward the couch. "Where's Cause?" "Went to get the steak." Sam moved aside as Paul slumped onto the couch and cradled his head. He looked from Paul to Dean, motioning to the distraught man. "Jane shot him," Dean quietly replied. He looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. Sam's brows furrowed in confusion. "Wait, are you saying you tapped into heaven? You did it? It worked?" Dean nodded jerkily and Sam let out a relieved laugh. "This is great. This is what we were aiming for." "Wasn't exactly expecting it to work," Dean ground out. "Oh, thank God," he sighed as he felt Castiel approach. "Dean, I need to warn you about Cause," Sam said just as Castiel appeared and dropped a large wooden stake on the coffee table. Paul jumped and stared up at Castiel. "Who are you?" "Castiel. An angel," Castiel said in annoyance. He narrowed his eyes at Paul and tilted his head as he looked over the human. "You've been brought back." Who he trailed off as he followed the trail of holy power back to Dean. He turned and stared at Dean. "Seraphiel." Dean flinched and kept his grace hidden from Castiel. "Don't really want to talk about it." "Why do you have to act like this?" Castiel huffed. He stepped forward and jabbed his finger at Dean's chest. "You're always hating yourself. You never think you're worthy of anything. You are worthy. You have walked the road to redemption and have succeeded. Why is it that everyone else sees it but you? I love you, and if I have to shove that love down your throat again, I will." Dean blinked in surprise. "What? Wait. Cause, are you?" He glanced away from the other angel to Sam. "Yeah. Has still pretty smashed," Sam replied. "Apparently," he went on Bender. "It is not of import," Castiel cut in, waving Sam off. "The whore of Babylon is moving forward with her plan." "Yeah, and what is that, exactly?" Dean asked. "She rises when Lucifer walks the earth," Castiel replied. "And she shall come, bearing false prophecy. This creature has the power to take a human's form. Read minds. So she knows just how to get to you," Sam said. "Using Dylan to get Rob and Jane under her thumb. And she's controlling the demons and setting everyone up with that fake exorcism," Dean said. "What exorcism?" Castiel asked. "Virga Butman Levithmong," Sam replied. Castiel snorted in amusement. "You breed with the mouth of a goat." He caught Sam's unamused expression and looked down sulkily. "It's funnier in Enochian," he said defensively. Dean smirked and nodded. "Anyway, the demons smoke out for fun, and so, what? We already know all this. What's her endgame? Chaos. There are easier ways to go about that." Castiel nodded to Paul, who stiffened under the sudden attention. "What you just saw. Innocent blood spilled in God's name." "Innocent blood?" Shes stealing my gig. Dean shouted, flapping his wings out in anger. I'm the great corrupter. I'm the manipulator. Oh, this ends now. He turned and stopped as Castiel lightly grasped his wrist. He looked at Castiel and sighed, shaking his head. We still need a true servant of heaven, Castiel said. Well, we don't got one. Dean sighed in frustration as Castiel vanished. Great. What was that about? Think he went to get David, Sam replied. Just as the words left Sam's mouth, Castiel reappeared with the pastor in tow. What the hell was that? David looked around and his eyes fell on Paul, who was staring back miserably. Paul. Oh, God. You're alive. Am I? 'Cause this place has gone past demon crazy to something else altogether, Paul replied, his voice wavering. But how? David gestured to the blood on Paul's chest. You were shot. I watched you die. Lee insists he turned away, covering his mouth in horror. Lee, something's wrong with my little girl. Angels condoning murder. We don't, actually, Castiel said as he slumped against the wall. Not of innocence. Demons, however, that's what they encourage. Oh, and Seraphiel, of course. Thank you, Castiel, Dean said tightly. All right, so who wants to give him the bad news and the pep talk? David stared at the wooden stake in his hands, shaking his head. But Shess, my daughter. Not anymore, Padre, Dean said quietly. Shess been dead since before the first vision. Could you bring her back? Like with Paul. Dean sighed and looked at Castiel. Even if I had the power and access to do that, would you really want to drag her away from paradise? But Paul. His soul hadn't left this plane yet. David lowered his head, nodding solemnly. It's just, why does it have to be me? You're a servant of heaven, Castiel replied. And you're an angel, David retorted. Poor example of one. Castiel glanced at Dean and grimaced. I think any angel on humanity's side would be a poor example right now. Ain't that the truth, Dean grumbled. Paul looked up, shifting his gaze between the men in the room. What about me? What do I need to do? Sam patted Paul's shoulder. I think you should just sit tight for now. But I want to help, Paul argued. This is my home, and I want to help. Do something. Sam shrugged as he looked at Dean and Castiel. Dead man walking. It'd be a good distraction. Burby played up that Hesed demon, Dean pointed out. He sighed as he shook his head. No, I think he'll be distraction enough for this. When they arrived at the church, the small group casually made their way inside. Jane and Rob passed by, dragging a struggling woman. David forced himself to look away as Dean squeezed his arm. They followed Jane and Rob and paused just outside the room Lee was in. They listened in as she instructed Jane and Rob to place the woman with the rest of the sinners. Dean quickly scanned the small room where the woman had been stashed. Shit. That storage room's full of people, Dean hissed. Kids, too. What? David moved to run in, but Dean held him back and dragged him up the hall a few feet. Go around and take the other door. Get behind her, Dean said. I got the front. He took a deep breath and moved to stand in the doorway. He let his power drift toward Lee, pushing forward his darker aspects. Looks like someone's having a party and I wasn't invited. He pouted as he leaned against the doorframe. He slowly unfurled his wings and gave a lopsided smirk. Lee looked past Rob and Jane to Dean. To Seraphiel. She gasped. She grinned and held her arm out, gesturing to Dean. Behold. The angel, Seraphiel. Made flesh through Dean Winchester, servant of heaven. Dean managed to keep his smirk in place, ignoring the wicked tone in which Lee spoke. He inclined his head and spread his wings wide as he stepped fully into the room. He set the lights flickering, casting out shadows of his wings. That's me, he drawled. Seraphiel. Fallen angel. Oh, this vessel might have been servant of heaven material, but I sure as fuck ain't. Isn't that right, whore of Babylon? Lee's smile faltered as the townspeople looked at her in betrayal. She rounded on Dean. Why are you? We're on the same side. She shouted. We both serve Lucifer. This is our time. Our time? Dean scoffed. Last I checked, I didn't enter into this apocalypse. I'm not just another game piece. I'm the wild card. Exactly. You're what's gonna tip this in our favor. Lee said excitedly. I'm a fan of your work. The Crusades. 200 years of innocent blood spilled in God's name. Corruption the likes of which have never been seen since. The Inquisition. The Black Death. And here you are, possessing Dean Winchester. And you managed to fool me. It's perfect. It's like all the stories about you, but even better. Oh, the things we could accomplish together. Dean laughed as he shifted his weight and crossed his arms. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw David slip into the room and draw close to Lee. What? You're suggesting we burn this town and take this show on the road? And why? And she saw a shadow on the ground beside her and turned, flinging out an arm and sending David flying across the room. Her eyes fell upon the stake and followed it as it flew into Dean's hand. She narrowed her eyes. As if that's gonna work, she growled. You're no servant of heaven. Yeah? Well, you're not much of a demon, Dean snapped as he drove the stake into Lee's chest. He threw open his connection with heaven and pulled up every thought and will for protecting humanity from Lee and her corruption into guiding heaven's power into the stake. Lee shrieked as her being burned away, leaving a smoldering pile of ash where she once stood. Dean scrambled back in shock, folding his wings tightly around himself. No way that shoulder worked, he whispered. He had been aiming to hurt her as much as possible. Maybe cripple her long enough for David to use the stake. With his wings tight against his body, he could feel that his smallest set had fully regrown and he began to shake. This isn't right, he whispered hoarsely. Sam ran up to Dean's side and stared down at Lee's smoking remains. How did you? I thought you said you couldn't kill her. Dean shook his head and took a few more steps back, backing into Castiel. He shuddered as he felt Castiel's grace and wings envelope him. I don't know, he insisted. Two just wanted to stop her. To keep everyone safe. To protect God's creations, Castiel said softly. Dean nodded, looking around at the people staring at him in shock. Even though he could feel their fear of him, there was a growing hint of gratitude. Yeah, he rubbed at his neck and closed his connection with heaven. He shook his head as he felt Castiel's grace prod him reprimandingly. Not now, please, he quietly begged. Let's just check on everyone. Make sure they're okay. Out of everyone that needed consoling about following Lee's commandments, Jane was the toughest. In other circumstances, Dean would have coldly told her she was going straight to hell for her mistake, but now he couldn't. He left her with a small bit of hope if he could redeem himself, then she, too, had a chance. Dean leaned on the roof of the Impala, giving Castiel a curious look. Feeling better? He asked. When Castiel nodded, he reached out with his grace and lightly stroked Castiel's. So you gonna tell me why you went on a bender? That's some hard drinking to get as far gone as you were. Castiel sighed and returned Dean's loving strokes. I spoke with Michael. He doesn't know about you nor Lucifer's involvement. Dean licked his lips as he nodded, pulling his wings in tight. He had to rearrange them a few times to find a comfortable position, which helped distract him from his nervousness. Doesn't mean he won't find out, he said. One way or another, they're gonna know, and we'll be ready for them, Castiel promised. He looked away and let his grace trail bits of his stress and insecurities from his meeting with Michael. He told me why I haven't been locked away like Anna. They need someone to keep an eye on you and your brother. To keep you safe. And since I'm the only angel that you trust. Right. And if it boiled down to it, you'd run to them for help if you got in over your head. Dean carefully wrapped his grace around Castiel, trying to reassure the other angel. I'm just a tool. A simple object with only one use. To keep you safe until Michael needs you. Dean scoffed as he sent tiny bursts of love through their connection. Michael's angry and Hess lashing out, he said. If Dad's really missing, then look, I know what it's like to have a deadbeat dad. Castiel looked back at Dean, frowning. Dean sent along his double meaning. Twice, had been rejected and ignored. Twice, he had to recover. I've just had more time to deal with it, he said with a shrug. How do you deal with it? On a good day. You get to kill a whore, Dean replied with a laugh. On a good night you might get to bang a smocking angel. Jehol. Dean choked on his laughter. Ha. No I mean like hot. Good looking. Attractive. Castiel moved around the car to stand in front of Dean. He closed the distance between them and lightly kissed Dean. Then let me say that I look forward to avenging a smoking angel later. I meant. Castiel cut off Dean's thoughts of worthlessness with a sharp jab to his claim on the other angel. Don't argue with me. Yes, Mom, Dean said cheekily. Ended. Moving to the next episode.